Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to the live stream. The weather's beautiful, bit of a cool breeze here in Spain, but absolutely gorgeous weather otherwise. Perfect golfing weather, needless to say. Uh, Weird time, isn't it? This sort of suddenly everybody is just like sort of autumn, August break, take two, and everybody, oh yeah, where are you now? I'm on holiday. Yeah, I'm on holiday. Holiday here, holiday there. Everybody's on holiday. Well, Formula One people. A lot of people, sadly, in the world not on holiday, suffering at the moment. But yeah, terrible times, and difficult times even in our tiny little world of Formula One, as there's a lot of discussion now about where Formula One is going and whether these new regulations that have been, what, 3, 4 years in the making are the future of our sport, and whether or not this hiatus will now give us, on the governing body, the powers that be, some sort of opportunity to change things around a little bit. It depends really on, as I've said many times already on live streams and other videos, it kind of depends on where you sit and what you're looking at for Formula One, and whether you're looking at it from the perspective of the commercial rights holder and Formula One becoming entertainment and big business, and it's all about making as much money as possible in order to sell on the product, or whether you're looking at it from the perspective of an engineer who loves technical challenges and loves the idea of being involved in a Formula One team, which is in fact a little NASA. It's a little prototype company building and designing and building its own products. Or whether you're looking at it from the point of view of a driver who wants the challenge of driving a racing car as quickly as possible around the corner and winning a race against other cars. I was going to say similar cars there, but Formula One has never made that a priority ever since the days of Bernie, which when he defined Formula One as you must design and build your own car. From that moment, the concept of buying a March off the shelf or a Lotus off the shelf or a Cooper and going racing, as Rob Walker did and won Grand Prix with Sterling Moss and Joe Siffert, that went out the window. And indeed, as Frank Williams started with a March when he rebooted, and a Brabham when he first started, actually, for that matter. That went out in 1981. And ever since then, Formula One has been about designing and building your own car. But sometimes they've got very close to one another when basically they've all, 80% of the grid have had Cosworth DFVs, or they've had similar engines, V8s, V10s. But now this is the first time I can remember when we've come up with a set of regulations which are politically driven, as distinct from driven by safety or wanting to reduce speed or other aspects, fitting the cars to the circuits, all the normal racing things to which you have to adjust, whether you're going from drum brakes to disc brakes, from normally aspirated to turbo, all these things that drivers can adjust to. But this new formula, particularly the not allowing the MGUH to be a part of it, means that it's politically driven, because we don't have that because of the presence of Audi. And as a result of the amount of power harvesting that we now need to do on some of the circuits, and we've had 3 already, it's looking as if there are fewer, as I keep saying, tools in the toolbox. And it's not as if a driver can go out and recreate new tools to put in his toolbox. If his forte is indeed incredible ability to extend the straight a little bit, get a slight curve just by extending the straight, and then start breaking into a rotation point that isn't the normal apex, but doing it beautifully against loading steering and increasing brake pedal pressure, not having too much understeer, and then finding a rotation point where you can just get the car turned and then accelerate in a very linear way. If that's your forte, and that's gone, there are no tools there to replace that. And you become a racing driver like the others. And yes, that's a good thing in a way from the business point of view, I suppose. All the drivers are very evenly matched now. If you're going to make the cars unevenly matched, which they are, let's make the drivers evenly matched. It's a weird thing, isn't it, that's going on there? Anyway, that's my little opening monologue and thought. Let's have a look at where we're at with your thoughts and comments. And the first comes from, I'll just bring up the main box here so we can see what's going on clearly. From Jim Huntz, who's one of our supporters. Thank you very much indeed, Jim. Hi, Peter. Formula One had a warning in Japan about the danger of on-track speed differentials. Are they going to wait for someone to get hurt or worse before scrapping the 26 specs? Well, it's a good point. And it's not as if there haven't been warnings even before the season started that this was going to be an issue. And I, for one, put my hand up as one of those that was saying this super clipping thing on the straight is incredibly dangerous. And whilst it's predictable and everybody's basically doing the same thing, I guess it's okay. But, that's a big, big proviso. And what we saw in Suzuka was a place where most of the drivers were harvesting power. But we know there are various ways of doing that. And what Franco Colapinto did was not unusual. He was going down to a lower gear. Well, it was unusual in the sense that he'd gone to 7th, and then Ollie Behrman would have thought, yeah, we're just doing this as normal, I'll pass him here. And it was a bona fide pass. We've seen lots of passes there in the past. But what he did then, he went back to 6 to try to sort of generate some more power. And that's what caught Ollie out. And that's a problem because we know that is a technique that the teams and drivers are using to generate the power. So I'm 100% on board with what you say, Jim, because it's not good. This is not motor racing for me. In the same way that I always used to distinguish between Formula One and endurance sports car racing, long before it became what it is today. But when it became when the performance was limited by fuel consumption and fuel pit stops, I thought, yeah, well, that's all right. It's a bit boring, though. I want proper racing. I want Formula One. And now, look at all the limitations we've got on the cars now. It's ridiculous. And this is one of them. And it's all around the lap. It's not over a stint. It's all around every lap. They're looking for power, and it would have been worse if they hadn't reduced it from 9 to 8 megajoules for qualifying. It would have been even worse, more cutting, and then beyond that, as I said to Cameron, a few of my sources are now telling me that in Sector 1 at Suzuka, the cars weren't even using electric power at all. They were only going up using the ice, which means they're only sort of 500 horsepower racing cars weighing much more than a super formula car or a 500 horsepower Formula One car from the 70s used to weigh 25 kilos more probably. So much worse power to weight ratio. Going up the hill at the S's Suzuka, one of the greatest bits of road in Formula One, with a car that's actually at that point, power to weight ratio wise, slower than a super formula car. What is that all about? As I keep saying, I say that sort of whimsically. What is it all about? What is it all about? I just don't get it. I just don't get how Formula One teams could have allowed themselves to be pushed into this situation. And of course, they're doing that so that they've got that, they were all panicking. They wouldn't have enough full electric power to get them through the complete lap of Suzuka. So the part they sacrificed was the S's because it's kind of corner limited, if you like, speed corner limited. And what you don't want to do is find you've got no power where you need it out of turn 9, out of turn 11, out of spoon, all that stuff. And even then it was dodgy. But, and you could say, well, and in case anybody's wondering, if it's corner limited, does it make any difference? Grip limited? Well, of course it makes a difference because it's one thing to drive a 500 horsepower car around a corner at whatever it is, 130 kilometers an hour speed, or say 150 kilometers an hour, say 160. And it's another to drive a 1,000 horsepower car around 160 mile an hour corner. Completely different. It's a completely different animal, even if the actual speed is the same. And that's the problem. That's why I keep saying there are far fewer tools in the toolbox now for the drivers to use. So anyway, thanks for that question. Another one from Jim. Hi, Peter. Would you ask Mark Slade what his car design specs would be if he was in charge of the FIA? Would he toss the hybrids completely? Well, that's a good question. I'll tell you what. I'll try and I'll send him a voicemail now and see if he comes back with a written answer on WhatsApp. It's brilliant, the modern technology. He may not respond, of course, because he may be on holiday as well. He probably is. I hope he is. Where are we, Mark Slade? Where is he? Where's he gone to? Mark Slade. Here we go. Hi, Mark. I'm doing a live stream at the moment, and Jim Honts has asked Peter, would you ask Mark Slade what his car design specs would be if he was in charge of the FIA? Would he toss the hybrids completely? So I'll leave that with you. If you want to write back an answer, we'll refer back. If you get this, I'll come back to you in a few minutes. Cheers. Bye bye. So we'll see what happens there with Mark. Another one from this is one from Sarosh, another of our regulars and supporters. Thank you very much, Sarosh. Peter, I thought it was impressive how Leclerc was able to be faster than Hamilton despite having older tyres, which were around 8 laps used, I think. I mean, Charles did a very good job after the pit stop, didn't he, of being there or thereabouts and looking after his rubber, whereas Lewis was just enjoying himself, I think, and racing hard and defending against George. And Charles was sort of watching all that, and good job. He did a very good job there. I mean, bear in mind he came in before the safety car, so a couple of those laps were slow laps. But having said that, he it was a classic Charles drive, wasn't it? And he was not that much quicker than Lewis anywhere. In fact, there were places where Lewis was probably quicker, but he just judged the race really well in terms of time management and got it there. And yeah, it was a good drive. So as I keep saying, Lewis, if the Ferrari becomes a race-winning car, or circumstances are open enough or changeable enough on any given day for a Ferrari to win a race, Lewis for sure will have as much opportunity to win and will win if Charles wins. He's a winning driver. He's at that level again for sure. Well, he's never really not been at that level. I mean, he won at Mercedes, didn't he? But against George, but he's there. But over a season, it's going to be Charles who's doing the better job, and that was a classic example of a Charles Leclerc great Grand Prix drive, I thought. From Sarosh as well. Do you think drivers with good throttle application like Perez would have an advantage since it's very sensitive? I thought Kimi was able to find an advantage over George in this area. Yeah, I think they can, but I think it's I don't know how many people have seen that interview I did with Mark after the race, and Mark makes a very good point, which is that the current Grand Prix cars are more like dragsters than ever before in the history of the sport. And that is a different animal altogether. And yes, very good throttle response, very linear throttle response of the Sergio Perez, Jenson Button, Max Verstappen, Kimi Antonelli ilk is a great thing for that. But it's also a question of patience. It's a question of patience. And that's the problem, I think, that guys like that's what's throttling back, excuse the pun on the word throttle, guys like George and Max, because any advantage, and if you take George into turn one as a good example, where he's super quick at Suzuka and quicker than Kimi there for sure, but because of that, he's going in with more speed into turn two or 1B, whatever you want to call it, and which is the tighter part of one, and he wants a reward for that, for what he's done there, and he's not getting it. He's just not getting that reward because the car needs to be absolutely straight, it needs to come from a slower point in the middle of turn two, and that's not something George has ever done before. He's always used that speed to get the car nicely balanced through two, and that's how he drives. And I say balance, what I mean is that with a little bit of oversteer. And Max, it's a different thing because he turns in on the brakes more, but he's so used to having that advantage that he's never really had to play. He's very patient mid-corner. He's never been interested in high minimum speeds. That's always a thing. That's his rotation point. But that's a very different thing from just going into a corner and then just waiting until the car's absolutely straight and then accelerating. And I think that's basically what you got to do now. Providing you got your power managed correctly around the lap, it is all about driving the car as if it's a drag racer and just making sure you just got all the straight exits. And it doesn't reward anybody now who's actually doing a good job into the corner, which is sacrilege really for me, because that's the one thing Formula One was always all about. It was distinguishing the Stirling Mosses from the Mike Hawthorns because of what Stirling was able to do into a corner rather than apex to exit. And that's what James Hunt always used to say, my granny can drive from apex to exit. That's nonsense, that's easy. It's all about the stability that you can generate going very quickly into a corner when you got flick oversteer or something like that. And that's where the great drivers have always been good. And that's not important anymore. And so, yes, of course, throttle application is very important. But when I was talking about the difference between George and Kimi at Suzuka and the way they were coming out of 9 and the way actually Kimi was getting to a higher speed sooner, but using less acceleration, that is basically what I'm saying. You know, yes, it's partly throttle application, but it's mainly the moment at which you put the power on. That's what it is. And I think Mark's absolutely right there. You're just driving a dragster now. As I said, you know, we've had one dragster in Formula One, Danny Ongaias. I'm just checking to see if Mark hasn't replied yet. Danny Ongaias. And he was all right. But he actually was a very funny guy, Danny Ongaias, because he drove for Ensign. And I don't think he'd ever been out. Well, actually, it's not true because he was born I think he was born in Hawaii, and he was very good in drag racing early on in his career. And he's a big star in America, a big drag racing star. And anyway, he made the big thing to come to. He found a big sponsor, an individual guy that thought he was great. I can't remember his name now. I have to think, drag that one out of the old memory bank. And he got this money to do Formula One. And Ensign was available, and Maurice Nunn knew of him and knew that there was money there. Basically, would cover the costs of running the car for the year. No different from today from some of the drivers, particularly F2, of course, F3. And so he said, right, well, you know, as Maurice would, based in Walsall in the Midlands of England, fairly urban, well, very urban, fairly depressing place, very industrial. He said, well, you know, get a flight over and we'll see you at the factory at 9 o'clock on this given day. And on this given day, Danny Ongaias arrived in a black taxi from Heathrow. And Maurice said, what are you doing? What's this black taxi? And he said, oh, I had no idea where it was. I just told the cabbie to take me there. And it was like, back in those days, you know, it was like £350 thing, you know, more than Mo would spend on his crew team salary for a month. He couldn't believe it. That was Danny. And then there was another thing Danny did. His first test actually in Brazil. He came in. You know how obviously we all know. You know, when you're coming into the pit lane after a run, at any point you go like that, and then the mechanics push you back into the garage, right? So Danny comes in after his run and just goes nose first into the garage, and Mo sort of quietly says, "Yeah, next time, don't worry about it. You know, next time just turn left and we'll push you back, no problem." It was 3 times before the penny actually dropped. That's what he kept. 3 times he drove it nose into the garage. Anyway, that was Danny, drag racing. Anyway, we've got drag racing again. So welcome back to drag racing in Formula One, the World Drag Racing Championship. And if people say to me, you know, do you think, as Cameron did, and he did, there was a precursor, obviously, which is, you know, if the Red Bull continues to be as unimpressive as it is now in terms of grip and balance and everything else, do you think Max will see out the year? And I had to say, well, I'm not sure he will, because where is the challenge? And he wants to become a better driver and drive more interesting cars every day of his life. Yes, he wants to win, but above all, to get out of bed in the morning now, he just wants to enjoy his racing and his driving. He's driving more than anything. And, you know, where is the driving where is the thrill if it's basically a drag racer that he's now controlling? And it's not a very good drag racer. That's the real point, isn't it? Look at it off the line. It was absolutely terrible, both of them, he and Hadjar. And he's made terrible starts all 3 races. So, yeah, it's not. And again, when I talk to Mark, and I got to confess, the members of our channel did get more than I actually bargained for when I put out the members only chat I had with Mark, which is now public and you can watch it. And I've edited it. When I was so I don't know what I was. Didn't have a brain in gear or tired or whatever. When I did that and posted it, I actually posted the original as distinct from the edited version. And there's quite a lot of chat about me at the end of it, about the curriculum at school that Jack, my son, is about to embark upon, and a bit of golf chat, I think, and a bit of this and a bit of that. But there's also talk about Max and about drag racing and where we're going, and you know, it's Mark's pretty upset about all this. He said, after race 2, he was prepared to sort of give a pass to quite a lot of it. But after race 3, as to what we saw at Suzuka, the world's greatest Grand Prix circuit, in the eyes of many, including me, it was not good at all. So anyway, that's now been edited and it is out in public. And Mark makes some very good points in that little chat we had. Another one from Sarosh. Last point, quite happy for Gasly. I predicted that McLaren and Mercedes are going to be close before the season start. Yeah, I'm happy for Pierre. He's had a hard run ever since basically he got dropped by Red Bull. And he's doing really well now. And a lot of that, as I keep saying, a lot of what you're seeing now at Alpine is, in my opinion, it's Pierre's brain with Steve Nilsson's brain putting together a nice team now with good people who know what they're doing, and there's good man management there now as a result. And in the background, there's Pierre's personal driver management team, which is also very strong and ART inspired. In other words, a lot of the guys there have come from the old days, the great days of ART. So that you're seeing a lot of knitting together now at Alpine in a way that hasn't happened before. I'm presuming, therefore, that Flavio's taking a step backwards. Although I've got to say, not only that Benetton mug the other day, which has stood the test of time, but I've actually got a Benetton pullover, which I was given, I think, in the the sort of very early Flavio era, and it's still absolutely perfect. Beautiful wool, beautifully made. So full marks to Benetton. Great pullovers. And you predicted, Sarosh, that McLaren and Mercedes are going to be close. Well, I'm glad you did, because I thought I was the only person saying, when everybody was getting on the Mercedes bandwagon and the George Russell bandwagon, I was saying, yeah, I think George will be world champion, but do not count out McLaren this quickly, because even if they're not looking very good in the Bahrain test, they will be quick this year. It's inconceivable they won't have a decent car. And I think you and I both proved to be correct there, Sarosh. Ronnie Way, another of our fans, well, not fans, are completely the wrong word, supporters. Thank you very much indeed. Hi, Peter. The enforced brake, how much improvements do you think Red Bull can deliver through battery, engine, aero and balance? A lot of catching up as other teams will do likewise. Yeah. Well, it's such an unusual situation for two reasons. One, having this break at this point of the year, and two, and not being able to test. I think that's the key point. And then on top of that, the new regulations are so confusing and complicated anyway. I don't know. I've got to be honest with you. I have absolutely no idea how much progress Red Bull will be able to make against the other teams by the time we get to Miami. Because this is, think about it. We used to have breaks like this. I mean, the season used to start years ago in the 60s, used to start on January the 1st and then restart in sort of May, that sort of time. And so there was a lot of time to run the cars, and go testing. I mean, that was it, wasn't it? I mean, if they could test now, if they said, okay, we got this period, but just for the fans, everything else, we're going to allow 5 days of testing at Barcelona. I think, I and many others could probably make a more accurate prediction on what changes might work and how that would go. But because they're not allowed to test, and it's all going to be on CFD, and it's all going to be theoretical, not theoretical, but it's all going to be non-physical, if you see what I mean, then it's very difficult, because it depends on how much they understand about why they're slow. Now, I've always said it's much more difficult to know why you're quick than why you're slow, because when you're slow, you've got markers and you can actually, and Max will have spent the entire second half of the race behind Pierre Gasly. So he'll have input about where the Alpine is better than and therefore the Mercedes PU, I guess, is better than the Red Bull powertrain Ford. So that'll be input they'll be digesting. I would suggest that'll be very useful data for them. They'll be working on the starts. So I can't imagine in 5 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever it is now, Red Bull won't be able to get on top of why they're not quick off the line. Bearing in mind, Lindblad was very good off the line in Japan. So that's one thing. You've got to say now, from here on in theory, wherever Max and Isaac qualify, that should be there or thereabouts where they finish the first lap of the race. So that's something that might be an improvement. then beyond that, Max is talking. I was interesting also that he's quite a lot of the weekend he was also complaining about the power, the downshifting not being in sync, something he always used to complain about. Maybe it's just like a habit of his to complain about it, but or maybe he's just super sensitive to it, and he probably is, given the way he does brake with lateral load. But he was complaining about the downshifts, and I suppose they've got time now to get on top of that in a way that they wouldn't have if they didn't have this brake. That's the second thing they might be able to get on top of. The third is, and here we still have no idea really about how that powertrain compares with Mercedes and Ferrari, to be blunt. But on the assumption that it's not that far away, which we can kind of draw, I think, then the biggest problem is going to be grip level. And then beyond that, obviously, getting the front to work. There's no point in getting the front to work and having a pointy car if they're still 5 points down on grip level overall, because of course you can balance any racing car. You know, you can make it go slower and slower and slower until you got a balance. So let's put understeer out off the table for a second and just talk about overall downforce and grip of the car. That's why I say I have no idea, because it's a really difficult thing. Obviously it's limited by the budget cap, the amount of CFD and wind tunnel time you can use, but Red Bull obviously have more time than Mercedes or McLaren or Ferrari. Oh, do they more? I don't know, but certainly more than Mercedes and McLaren. So, because they, you know, look at the results last year. So in theory, they've got an opportunity now to maybe use a bit more of that leeway to see where they're at with downforce numbers, because that is the biggest issue they've got. And then if you've got a lot of downforce and then you go to a circuit like Monaco, where obviously it's all slow corners, then you can obviously come down, you know, you go up with wing settings and all the rest of it, and then you can trim the car. If you've got a sort of nice big sweet spot of downforce, then you can trim the car and have decent turn in for Max and get the front end to work, and for Isaac for that matter, because that's how he drives too. So, but then again, you know, a Mercedes going to get better? Absolutely, for sure. I mean, they haven't made a lot of changes to the car yet, have they? And we've had George not happy with the, well, he made the car quite pointy, didn't he? Which is Max would have loved to have done in Suzuka. And then he seemed to overheat the rears, so he never really found a balance. But I think Mercedes potentially are in danger of not progressing as much as they might, because I think a lot of that is driver induced. And I think George will be pushing them into wanting to change things to make the car more drivable, if that's the right word. But in reality, I don't think, you know, the car he drove was the car that Kimi was driving, and Kimi didn't faff around with the setup that much, did he? So I think that comes down to Kimi's driving it more like a dragster than George Russell. And whether that's something that George will come to terms with or not, I doubt very much, for the same reasons that we've been talking about earlier. You know, the way he drives is the way he drives, and it's always worked for him. And this was a race where, you know, unusual for George to have a tire management issue. And he did, compared with Oscar Piastri. And that's, you know, that's exactly what we were saying. You know, everything's on its head now. And these dragsters have to be driven in a certain way. And it looks like there's a pattern where the younger guys are more able to just get in and do that. You know, the Lindblads, the Hadjars, the, dare I say it, Antonellis. And if the car is very quick or has a pretty good level of performance like a Ferrari, that's one thing, and you can get the best from that car and be pretty near the front, as Charles and Lewis are. But if the car is lacking in a substantial area, like the Red Bull, there's nothing you can do there. So you can't, there's no comparison now with the job, say, Charles Leclerc is doing in the Ferrari with the job Max Verstappen's trying to do in the Red Bull. And as I said in my video, Max, after that race, I suspect when he got back to the hotel room, would have been thinking, well, that was all very well, and we finished, we got good data, but you know, what was I there for? What did I bring to the day today that a lot of other drivers wouldn't have brought? And not many racing drivers think that way, of course, because their world revolves around them. But when you're Max Verstappen, and you know innately how good, you know, that you are good, and you can do special things with a car, and all of a sudden you drive a race where you didn't do any of those special things because you were unable to do them, because the car wouldn't let you and the engineers wouldn't let you, and because the power management wouldn't let you, then, you know, you do start to think, what is it all about? Why do I need to do this? You know, what is the point of me passing Pierre Gasly into the chicane if I know he's going to pass me coming out? What is that all about? It's just like people playing computer games. Anyway, Drew C. Peter, injuries are no good, but what's the hype about Ollie limping? I'm South African. You're an Aussie. You are Aussie. Our people love rugby. Imagine if there was a rule change every time a guy started limping in rugby. Well, I'm not being a guy that follows Formula One on social media, because I've usually had enough of it by the Grand Prix weekend, and I get on with a lot of other things in my life. You're the first to alert me to that people have been going on about Ollie limping. I mean, I just said, well, he was fine, he banged on the leg and he was fine. I just dismissed it like that, as I would, being a salty old Formula One journalist who's been there, done that. You know, I think the first time this struck me was when Olivier Panis had a big shunt in Canada, broke his legs, I think. And my reaction, as it always was, oh, I'm glad he only broke his leg, that's fine. You know, that sounds callous, but that was, you know, when you've lived through the Formula One that I've known, that's, you know, that was a great result. And I remember going to the F1 racing office a couple of days after that accident, and everybody was like, you know, everybody was effectively wearing black armbands. You know, it was just like the world had stopped revolving. I said, what's happened? Said, oh, you know, Olivier shunt, wasn't it terrible? I thought, well, he's all right, he broke his leg, I think. You know, and now it's got to the point where you're limping, and people apparently, I don't know, from what you say, are panicking about it. No, I mean, what Formula One needs to say is that Ollie was perfectly protected, almost perfectly protected by the survival cell of that car, and the barriers did a brilliant job. So that's all fine. Congratulations to the Formula One people who've made all that happen. But nothing like as much praise should be given to the writers of regulations that can allow a driver like Colapinto suddenly go from 7th to 6th effectively on the straight in front of a car that's just about to pass him. That is not clever. That is just dangerous. He got away with it because of all the safety, the brilliant safety we have in the circuits and the cars now. But it was a very, very dangerous thing for Colapinto to have done. And there doesn't seem to be any mention of blame on him, but I did make the point that, I think I made the point with Cameron actually, that if you know you've got a guy right behind you, and he must have by then, I'm sure he did, I just can't believe he didn't, then you should be aware. It's just like if you're slow off the line on the grid, you don't move sharp left or sharp right. You just keep the car absolutely straight, knowing that everyone is going to blast past you. But if you start moving the steering wheel, you know, mayhem may ensue. And it's the same thing, you know, if you're Colapinto and you know that you've got a guy right behind you, you don't start going from 7th to 6th gear on the straight. I'm sorry, you just don't do it. Even if the engineers tell you to do it, you don't do it because it's dangerous. And will the FIA get on top of that? They don't seem to be, so I doubt they will. And let's goes back to the first question of our live stream today. You know, is now the time to start making these changes? But how they would police that, I've got no idea, because the people that police it are the people that wrote the rule saying, you know, you've got to harvest this amount of energy. And of course, one of the ways that you can do that is by going down a gear. Terrible, terrible. 01 Drew again. Peter, do Aston have to wait to be outside the 2% or 4% rule in order to do an engine upgrade? So they have to sit on their hands until then, or what's happening? Because 3 races I've seen no change. I don't think it's that. I think it's that they kind of know they need to solve the battery problem. And I don't think this is only my opinion, I think the battery problem is more of an issue than any sort of harmonic vibration problem. And I think they're trying to work on solving the battery issue, but either it's taking a long time or they don't know how to do it. One of the two. So I don't know. I think it's that they're doing it, but it's taking time, and they will get there. Every team has vibration issues, and they'll all be working on that in this period as well. So in theory, if you're talking about what Aston might do in this 5-year period, 5-month period, sorry, 5-week period, they will come out with probably less harmonic vibration, but that won't solve the problem because the battery is much more of an issue than that in terms of overheating as well and other things. And will this allow them to come up with a completely new battery that they may be allowed to run or not is another question. I've asked a few people about that. Nobody seems to know, because it's all so much up in the air. I think from their point of view, Aston's point of view, they're just thinking, we want to get it. We want this battery to work properly, and we can't imagine Formula One won't allow us to do that. It's in the sport's best interest to do it. I think they'll be thinking that way. I may be wrong, but they're so far off the pace, and they're such an embarrassment to Formula One at the moment that I think they're thinking we can basically get a pass on that. But I may be wrong. Don't quote me on that. That's for sure. Zavish Dougal. Hi, another of our regulars. Thank you very much indeed, Zavish. I was a defender of the 26 regs until Suzuka. Now I hate them. Undercuts don't matter. Corners are useless. All high-speed corners are medium now. All yo-yo racing. Lots of control given to the software. Yeah, I think, and Mark Slade echoed that sentiment, didn't he? He was kind of ebullient about it after China, and then completely changed his tune after, he still hasn't replied, after Suzuka. And yeah, welcome to the club, because all the things, an overtake, it's now to the point where not only were the overtakes such as they were into the chicane not overtakes, but worse than that, they actually effectively made the chicane a non-overtaking area completely, because it meant that if you got past in the chicane, you were bound to get past going into turn one. So the whole thing was Suzuka's great overtaking area, spectacular overtaking area into the chicane, was now effectively gone. So in a time when everybody's talking about overtaking and passing, and isn't it brilliant, in reality, they're taking away the places in which you can overtake. I just don't get it. And as I keep saying, and those runs down the hill, all credit to Charles Leclerc for being the one guy that always did his passes on the outside. Good on him. But, and not the only guy, obviously, but, you can tell Charles was saying, I'm going to have some fun here. Going, woo, marbles. Good stuff, It's the only way you could stay awake, I think. Yeah. David Dallin. Hi, Peter. Big fan. Thank you very much indeed, David. Another of our big supporters. Thank you. Fernando and Max should retire and do Le Mans together. Max said recently that he would want to do it with Fernando and Sebastian Vettel. 3 of them together would be fun to see. Yeah, as I said, it's one thing, if Max was in a Mercedes now or a Ferrari and he had half a chance of winning a race, well, more than half a chance, I think obviously he wouldn't be stopping Formula One or even looking over his shoulder, really, because a world championship is a world championship, a Grand Prix win is a Grand Prix win. But if he's not in that situation, it's not as if he's given up trying and wants to make the car better and all that. Of course he drives the car on the limit. And I think he did that. He drove that Red Bull absolutely on the limit of what it could do around Suzuka in the Grand Prix. Nobody could criticize him for that. The only criticism you could make for Max would be, just keep fighting, Max, keep fighting. Things might change one day. And he might say, well, I've done enough fighting already. I just want to drive proper racing cars and then be rewarded when I do a decent job into a corner. And I can't really blame him for thinking that way, because that is what he's all about. And if you can do that in a car around the Nürburgring, that GT3 thing, or if you can do that at Le Mans, which I actually kind of doubt, actually. I'm surprised that he wants to do Le Mans, because to me, Le Mans is very limited in a number of ways. But anyway, maybe it's not as difficult in that sense as Formula One now. And you can do a proper lap without having to worry about harvesting or fuel or whatever. With Fernando and Sebastian Vettel, yeah, it'd be good, wouldn't it? It'd be very good. What a combo that would be. Wow. Yeah, excellent. But just getting back to Max and Formula One, of course he would see it, he'd be giving it 100% if he was in a racing, a winning car. But if he's not in a winning car and he can't impart anything more than a normal racing driver into a car that's at best going to finish 7th, that's different from Max being able to make a difference in a car that is capable of finishing 7th, and he's going to try and make it finish 6th or 5th because of what he can do behind the wheel. But if he knows that no matter what he does behind the wheel, it's still going to be a P7 car, which is kind of where they're at, or it is where they're at, then that's the problem I think the Formula One world faces, because he may well decide that he's had enough, and that'd be a terrible thing. I'd really miss Max in Formula One, and because he's the gold standard in my opinion right now, and if he goes, Formula One will definitely suffer as a result, in my opinion. I mean, a lot of people would say, oh, drivers are replaceable, get rid of Max, welcome Kimi, blah blah blah, and people can say what they think. I'm just expressing my opinion, which if Max goes, I think we've lost a gold standard big time. And at the moment, I think there's a great risk that might happen, unless Red Bull can come up with a lot more downforce in 4 weeks, which I don't think they will, to be honest with you. Anyway, Tim Green. Hi, Peter. How realistically can backmarker teams like Aston do over the 1 month gap between the next race to catch up, taking into consideration budget cap? Yeah, well, they've got more scope, obviously, even more than Red Bull, with CFD, computational fluid dynamics, which is basically a wind tunnel on a computer screen, and the use of the wind tunnel and everything else. And so, yeah, I can't imagine Aston, I think, are worried that much about aero at the moment, or grip. I don't think they've even gone quick enough to know where they're at, but all their effort will be on trying to get the engine to work, the power unit to work, heating, vibration, cooling systems, all of that. Yeah, admittedly, Adrian may need to be doing some redesigns in order to increase cooling, or maybe to lessen vibration at certain points of the harmonic range. And that's something that will require quite a lot of redesign, and maybe that's something they can do within the budget cap that wouldn't be that painful, and they could get away with that, maybe. I don't know. Difficult. But I still think, over the season, the Aston Martin Honda will be a quick car by the end of the year, and will probably be half reasonable by mid-season. But what's slightly worrying, isn't it, that they actually weren't as good in Japan as they were in China. Not that good's the wrong word, but they certainly weren't as slow in China as they were in Japan, where they struggled to beat the Cadillacs, for Pete's sake. I mean, I don't know, on their home Grand Prix. Hi, Peter. Valiant attempts to make sense of the new regs set aside. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, St. Dobes. Do you think that Formula One has a larger problem, that a lot of the newer, more action and drama keen fans don't have the patience or understanding to wait for the sport to turn around the current situation, and we'll see an exponential drop-off in viewership from them, as well as purists who don't like the racing? Yes, is the answer to that. I think we will. I don't know how long Formula One fans in America, I mean, that seems to be the litmus test these days of all things successful or not in Formula One. The American fans love it, and we got this, we got that. What are they going to do if there's a lot of obvious super clipping in Miami, and a lot of sort of after you Claude passing and repassing, which isn't real passing, and the fans start to get a bit bored with it all? I mean, I know what I would do. I would say, right, mid-season, back to V10s, back to V8s. Let's go motor racing again. And Formula One's doing its own electric formula. So don't worry about it. We're going to save the planet. We're going to do our own electric formula, and the drivers are each going to do a round of that, like BMW Pro cars in the 80s. No problem. It's all going to be there. But the Formula One is going to be proper race cars, and we're going to do it from mid-season. Get on with it. And I think all the Formula One teams would probably say yes. Well, not all of them. Some of them would withdraw, wouldn't they? But they'd be replaced by others. And, we'd go motor racing. But that won't happen, because they're so paranoid now about Wall Street and the share and what people think of Formula One and how to make money out of it, that none of that will happen, I don't think. So I think, potentially, I mean, I don't put myself out there in terms of getting that much feedback from what people think about it, because I'm pretty focused on what I do, and B, I've got a lot of other things I've got to do as well. But I do get the feeling that after Japan, a lot of people are not happy, and it'll be fascinating to see what they do now or don't do. Noah Simeo 2671. two questions. Hi, Peter. I was speaking with some newer fans who felt that despite everything Lewis has achieved, he isn't rated as highly as Max or even a Charles, let alone the all-time greats. That surprised me, given his success across eras, especially in the ground effect cars, despite not being very competitive. Has the narrative around him shifted post-21, or is this just recent bias? Again, I'm not that, exposed to what other people think. So all I can do is tell you what I think, which is that Lewis is absolutely, for sure, one of the greatest racing drivers of all time. And for a lot of his career so far, he has been the best. And as recently as 2 years ago, maybe even 1 year ago, I always said Max, Charles and Lewis in one phrase, because I've always rated them equally together. Obviously, three different drivers in terms of their backgrounds, how they got to Formula One, the teams for which they've driven, and where they're at now. Charles, very different from Max, very different from Lewis. But in terms of actual technique and physical talent, absolutely all of them right there. So anyone that doesn't rate Lewis as highly as Jim Clark or Max Verstappen or Michael Schumacher or Sterling Moss hasn't been watching Formula One enough, because you'd be crazy not to do that. And yes, you can always throw lots of comments out there. Oh, when Lewis is winning, he had the best car. Well, guess what? Most drivers win when they have the best car. Oh, Lewis, when it comes to this, he doesn't do that. Lewis is clean. He's a very, very clean racing driver, and that's to his credit. You couldn't say that about Michael or Senna, for example. Lewis, for most of his career, has turned in on the brakes beautifully, as Nigel Mansell did, as good as that. And then beyond that, he's done so much for the sport as a brand. And long before Liberty came in, he was out there developing the sport in the United States, and having to live with and put up with a lot of other factors outside the sport that worked against him in terms of his background, and getting over all that. And in his first year in Formula One, having $100 million fine for the team, all those things that he went through, just brilliant. So as I say, anybody that doesn't rate Lewis right up there doesn't know enough about Formula One, and they shouldn't be offering an opinion, in my judgment, because he is definitely one of the best. And I guess, if people today are saying, Max and Charles are better than Lewis, it's only based on the last couple of years, and they're right. They're absolutely right. But if you take Lewis's career in its entirety, they're completely and utterly wrong. And Lewis, is a different driver now to the driver we saw up to Abu Dhabi 21. And I did say at the time, and I repeat it, that the shock of everything that happened there, the events that came together in almost one moment in time, 1 minute in time, were, it was going to be very difficult for him to emerge from that and be the same racing driver again. And it proved to be true, multiplied by the Mercedes not being a very good car, of course, in 22, 23. And on top of that, the teammate he didn't want. And then, of course, losing the world championship, the drivers' championship, in the way he did, absolutely ridiculous. And all of those things, did add up. That's no doubt about that. And I think he is a different driver today. And we're starting to see on some corners, when the car's feeling pretty good, he's driving really, really well. And we're starting to see that on any given day now, he's within a couple of tenths of Charles Leclerc. And that's pretty impressive, isn't it? For a guy that's been around since 2007. I mean, it's very impressive that he can be that quick, and he can still win Grand Prix in the situations if the situations are right. So, I'm still massively behind Lewis as a great racing driver. Peter, this is from Aaron. To what extent does being a dirty racer correlate with the driver's off-track personality? Oh, that's a good question. It's a weird thing, isn't it? Because often you get drivers like Michael, who's, when Michael was not upset about anything, he was a very articulate in German and in English, and very mature representative of Formula One, and very well mannered and very presentable, and just very, very decorum, I think was the right word to describe Michael. Assuming he wasn't in some racing drama going on, but we're talking about some sort of black tie function somewhere. A lot of decorum around Michael, and yet he was a dirty racing driver. You could argue, you know, not only, I mean, things he did himself, like the Monaco thing, but also with, you know, Jacques Villeneuve at Jerez and other stuff. You know, he was not. I think being clean and being absolutely sort of Sterling Moss, Lewis Hamilton-esque was never something that entered Michael's head. He was always, if there's an advantage here, I'm going to take it. That's what they do in football, and that's what Ayrton did. And Ayrton was that as well, you know, brake testing in Formula 3 and even in Formula 1 actually. And then lots of other weird things, as you know, as we know from with Prost going into the famous chicane at Suzuka and turn 1 at Suzuka, all those things against Damon at no, that was Michael, wasn't it? No, you know, just in general, being a guy you could never trust, I guess is the right way to describe that. And yet he also was a very gentle, soft person off the track, and was going up to the Jim Clark trophy room because he wanted to pay his respects to Jim. I mean, how many current Grand Prix drivers do that? And just a lovely guy, very nice guy. You could, you know, talk to Ayrton for hours, and he was a very well opinionated person too. So you got those, had those two sort of contrasts with those two drivers. And yet, if I think about, and it kind of translated the other way. If you took somebody like Jacques Lafitte, who was a very clean racing driver, and you know, very like Lewis in that respect. He always respected the other driver, never did anything that a Peroni would do, or even a Patrick Depailler. You know, Lafitte was the guy that was always very, very clean. On the road, he was a complete maniac. And I drove with him a couple of times. I mean, it was just like, whoa, is this Jacques Lafitte I'm with? But he never drove like that on the racetrack. So you get all these weird things. It's a character thing, isn't it? That if you like that on the racetrack, you go the other way in real life. And equally, if you're quite clean on the racetrack, you express yourself in a road car or in other parts of your life. And so that's why I say it's a good question, this, because, you know, Nigel Mansell's a good example. I would say Nigel was one of the cleanest drivers I've ever seen as well. And he was a victim of quite a lot of dirty driving from guys like Andrea de Cesaris or Ayrton. And what was he like? What's he like away from the track? Yeah, I mean, Nigel's, I suppose he's an exception, isn't he? Because he's actually very upright and straight in his life as well. Special constable, policeman at one point, and always out there fighting for something in which he believes in the correct way, and being pretty respectful in a situation in which demands it. So there was one. Sterling, let's think about Sterling Moss. Sterling Moss was very clean, I would say, and in life was pretty clean as well. I mean, ducker and diver when it came to doing the right deal, but nothing dishonest ever about Sterling. He was just a very clever, shrewd guy, like his dad. So there was that. Jim Clark, very, very clean, and very, very clean out of the car. So I'm kind of destroying my own theories now. Is there a correlation between a dirty racer and off-track personality? No, I don't think there is at the end of the day. I think if you take the Lafitte example, and let's take Alan Prost now as another example. I think Prost was very clean as well, very clean, and Nicky for that matter. Both of them very clean racing drivers. And both of them fairly shrewd, is that the right way? Pretty politically adept out of the car. So yeah, there is that sort of contrast between those two, definitely. Max, I'd say Max is clean. I'd rather be wheel to wheel with Max than Charles Leclerc, that's for sure. I mean, Charles Leclerc's a good example, isn't he? I mean, he's Mr. Perfect when it comes to some sort of gala evening in Monaco, pulling up in his Ferrari outside the Hotel de Paris and just absolutely magical. And yet in a race car, poof, this guy is still histrionic. You know, he can definitely be hard work. And so there's a good example, actually, a modern example of a driver whose actual ethics on the racetrack, I think, are quite in contrast to his demeanor out of it, his character out of the car. So anyway, there were lots of, we can go on and on and on. Vittorio Brambilla, another one. He was he dirty driver though, Vittorio? Everybody thought he was crazy. I actually liked him a lot and I thought he was very quick. But he didn't go around chopping, you know, carving people up and chopping them off. And then, but what I was going to say with Vittorio is he again was a very, very nice guy out of the car and didn't say much, but he was a good person, a very good person. You know, I'd put my money on him to come to the aid of the party in any given moment. He was a good bloke, Vittorio. Patrick Tambay. I would say Patrick Tambay was slightly on the edge of being a dirty driver. Not much, but if he could chop somebody, I think he would. And yet he was, again, Mr. Perfect out of the car. Lovely guy. Just the, you know, the toast of France. The toast of the Champs-Élysées was Patrick Tambay. Moulin Rouge. But yeah, I mean, he was pretty aggressive in the car. Jochen Mass, you know, he was too. And very, very calm and relaxed and cool out of it. And it's interesting, isn't it? I suppose just to finish this point, how many drivers are in fact rated by fans on how they appear to be out of the car and how they come over in interviews and their body language in interviews, especially today when you don't see much of them other than when they're doing these interviews. That's how they judge the drivers, it seems. A lot of fans. Oh yeah, but this guy, he's always questioning the interviewer and being rude to the interviewer. You know, he's definitely a hard racing driver. He's definitely a dirty driver. There's a lot of very, you know, dotted lines from the way a guy behaves behind those ridiculously stupid interviews they have with what actually is reality, which is what he's doing in the race car. Anyway, that's a subject I think we need to pursue over the next 10 years because there are so many drivers out there that we can talk about. Tony Brooks. Tony Brooks was the epitome of perfection on the racetrack. Clean as you could be, precise, wonderfully fast, particularly on quick circuits like Spa, but also other circuits. Just a gentleman in every respect. But if you actually just chiseled away a little bit below the surface, he was quite a hard, tough man. You know, he definitely had his ego and he definitely protected his world. And he was, you know, you couldn't play around with Tony Brooks in the way you imagined you might have been able to if you just saw the way he was at the racetrack. And to me, he was definitely, you know, a big contrast there between the two. Superficially, on the face of it, incredibly charming, but yeah, you know, not as easy as his racing persona would suggest. That's not a criticism; it's just a description. I am Tim. Good day, Tim. Hi, Peter. Love your chats. Thank you very much. I heard Lando say the car gave him extra power, so he had to overtake, and then he had no charge to defend. This is what is wrong with these Gregs. Give control to the drivers. Well, I don't know how many times I've always said, when everybody said, oh, we want more overtaking, isn't it wonderful? We have overtaking, and Ross Brawn puts out the global survey and it comes back saying, yes, we want more overtaking, as if it's like the greatest breakthrough in thinking ever in the history of sport. And I've always said, did anybody ask, do we want more defense? And everybody says, oh, what do you mean? You know, I said, well, defense is just as dramatic as overtaking. Of course it is. It's part of the racing driver's art. Let's have more defense. But that means no overtaking. Yeah, I know. But that's what good defense is. And so it would go on. So no, in the end, the whole defense argument, led by me, I think, got thrown down the toilet. And that was it. So now it's great to see you and many others saying, this is pathetic overtaking. We want to see some defense. No chance to defend now on these cars. And you're absolutely right. You know, you pass going into the chicane. And what can you do coming out of it into turn one? How do you think Max felt getting blasted past by Pierre Gasly into one, having just outbraked him? Well, in theory, outbraked him, not. He's out power harvested him into the chicane. He's out sewing machined him into the chicane, and then, you know, as the team predicted, he was going to get repassed. I mean, when was the last time anybody said to Max Verstappen, "Oh, you're about to be passed here, Max. Don't do anything about it"? I think that more than anything would be enough to drive anybody mad, wouldn't it? A guy like Max Verstappen. And you're absolutely right. You know, and you're just agreeing with everything I've always said. If you create regulations where overtaking is the thing, and you have no thought at all given to defense, then, you know, all bets are off, I think. And that was clear. I mean, there was a time when I was misreading the regulations last year, along with millions of others, that I understood the regulations to say that you could have a boost if you were in defense as well, but you can't. So that's that. I'm Martin says, it's also come to light that the AI software continuously adjusts each lap so that the power harvesting isn't consistent. It needs to be linear and stable, not variable. I really hope they make some changes. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure a lot of things are coming to light, and some of them may be right, some of them may be spurious. There's so little information out there actually as to what is going on, and as Mark Slade was saying, you know, he very much doubts that those little battery graphics you see of the power that's now being harvested are indeed in any way accurate or real. So bear that in mind as well. And yeah, you know, you're just echoing everything I've said. These regulations are so complicated and so difficult, and they were made for a reason that didn't need to be made, which was that Formula One has to go even more down the electric car path, not fully, but as much as we possibly can, and we can get Audi into Formula One. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Instead of saying, let's just keep things more or less as they are, make the racing better, have even better television, give the fans access to the teams, the debriefs, the drivers' briefings, all the things Peter Windsor's always been talking about, increase the TV show like that, don't touch any of the technology, because we've got a nice balance now between hybrid engines and guys like Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, George Russell, Kimi Antonelli, all being able to race closely with one another. Let's touch that, just to improve the sport in terms of its global reach on television. That's all they needed to do. Instead of which they went down this absurd path. And although many people voiced an opinion at the time, I now hear, saying this was not good for Formula One, they were all shouted down. I say people involved in those meetings. Jez James says, TT rider John McGuinness once said that from the outside it must look crazy, but on the inside all is very calm. Do you think this is something one is born with, or can this be humanly created? Oh, it's not something you're born with. I think every human being has that capacity. When the body is and the mind is doing something well and in harmony, whether you're using a sewing machine, to talk about sewing machines, or whether you're riding a bike around the Isle of Man, or whether you're Max Verstappen in 2021 in a Red Bull going through the S's at Suzuka, then if you're doing something well, everything happens in harmony. And a lot of people describe that as everything is slowing down and it's in the zone. Which is correct. And it means that the body is adapted to what it is doing. And because you have a specific talent, in the case of Max, it is that feel for lateral load against retardation, against feeling the surface of the road, against supple balances that the car requires. Subtle balances requires supple inputs. Because he has that specific talent, once he applies that on a corner that demands it, it can all start happening in slow motion. That's correct. It's not the specific talent that makes him happy. He doesn't have a talent for making things happen slowly. A lot of people have that. You have that when you're riding a bicycle. When you have never ridden a bicycle, everything happens very quickly and whoa, whoa, whoa. But when you've ridden a bicycle a lot and you've got your balance, then everything is happening slowly and in the right time. And when you start doing wheelies on a bicycle, it all happens very violently initially and you panic. But then when you do it and you feel the moment, that you feel the point and you feel the energy that requires the right amount of pedal just to get the front up and then to keep it up, then it all happens quite smoothly and slowly and calmly. And I don't think it's any different if it's a fighter pilot doing a great job in a FA 15, whatever it is, FA, can't even remember what the FA numbers are now. But anyway, one of those, everything would be happening slowly for sure. And if it isn't, then you shouldn't be doing it. Ultimately, that's always a good sign. I mean, if you're a human being and something is happening in a very rushed way and you don't feel comfortable, back away a little bit and just make sure that it is, you think about it and how to make it work in harmony. It can be anything, it can be drawing, it can be mowing the lawn, it can be how you eat even, how you assimilate food and the pace at which you put the food in your mouth and all the harmony that is required there in order to make everything happen at the right rate for your digestion. And that's what that is. It's human beings finding this sweet spot of operation that allows them to get the best from themselves. And in the case of a racing driver, the best from the car. Good question, though. Thank you very much. And John McGuinness is right. I mean, I remember Nigel, and we'll talk to Nigel about this next time I chat to him. The first time he drove the Formula One Lotus at Ricard, it was very cold and it was late in the day. The light was going. The car had been driven by several other drivers as well, which is not a nice feeling. But yeah, he had his seat in there and he got in and he did sort of 8 laps and everything was in a rush and he didn't feel confident at all. And he almost felt like, I don't want to do this. This is Formula One is not for me. Everything's happening too quickly. And then because it was late night, it was lucky because he then had a night's sleep. And when he got into the car the next morning, his body had 8 hours to think about what it was required to do. And suddenly he was doing it. And that's another point, I think, if you can always sleep on something or whatever it is, I have this with Jack and his golf swing. We're trying something and he does sort of 6 or 7 attempts at what we want to do and it doesn't feel quite right and the balance has gone and this has gone and that has gone. I say, well, let's go sit down and just chat. And we have a chat and we look on the phones and we look at a few cars and things like that. And then after about 5 minutes, he gets back and hits the ball the same way, but now it's suddenly there because his body's had time to react to what it wants to do. And that's I think that's there's a book called Golf in the Kingdom, which I remember the author's name, very, very good book about how a lot of it is mental and it's golf is just one example of how that works, but motor racing, it definitely works. I've experienced that in a racing car. At the low level that I'm at, you can get in a car and everything can be very, very, whoa, what's this? Yeah. And then you get out of the car, 20 minutes, get back in, and everything suddenly seems to be happening in a more rational way. Sarah says, hi, everybody. Hi there. Herbert Williams says, morning, race fans. Herbert Williams says, did Merck get disqualified? Disqualified? April Fools? Yeah, it is April the 1st, isn't it? So what, yeah, well, that would be enough to worry old Toto, wouldn't it? But no, they haven't been disqualified. And yes, it is April Fool's Day, but I'm not doing any of that stuff. Nissam says, hi, Peter. How do you think of Formula 2 champions that's currently in Formula 1? Is it still relevant as Formula 1 feeder series? The current champion is not in Formula 1. Some skipped it. Some weren't close to winning it. Yeah, well, I was never a fan of Bernie and Max taking over Formula 3 and Formula 2. I knew it would be a disaster, and it's proved to be because now it's all about money, who can get the best deal with the team. Well, it's not only about, obviously some drivers do get money from outside sources now in a way that perhaps they couldn't have done 10 years ago. And Kimi's a good example of that, going straight into Formula 2. But that's not to say that Formula 2 wouldn't have played that role if it hadn't been bought by Formula 1 and taken control of, and Formula 2 still existed as it used to exist, as a much better category where it wasn't so expensive and there wasn't such a markup on all the spares and parts and all the rest of it. And Formula 2 races could be held away from Grand Prix and be what they are in their own right. Same with Formula 3. So that's why you see quite a lot of Formula 2 drivers winning and not getting into Formula One. Théo Pourchaire, good example. Very, very talented driver, but never really had a look. Anybody showed any interest in him, and that's terrible. And that's because of the way the Formula One system works and all the teams now with their academies and all that. And I think, you know, we'd see a lot more talented drivers doing well in Formula 2 if the costs were much less. And we had a few Grand Prix drivers doing Formula 2 periodically as they used to. Why not? Just to give us a standard at which we're driving. That's what would happen if it wasn't all controlled in the way it is. And so, yeah, I'm not a fan of this, because inevitably, if you have a lot of talent and a lot of money, you're going to make it anyway. You know, we don't need this system. And I don't like the way you go to the Formula 2 website and it's as if Formula 2 didn't even exist before GP2. And then you go to the GP2 website and it's as if Formula 2 didn't exist before GP2. And it completely, you know, they should have the history of Formula 2 right back to 1966. Why don't they? What's this thing? You know, why don't they do that? And it's as if they invented it all, and it's completely wrong. So the current champion is not in Formula One. Some skipped it, some weren't close to winning it. Yeah, and you see great talents not doing that well in Formula 2 because they're not with the right team, and all of the same engine, the same chassis. You'd think it's all very competitive, but it's all very controlled. When I say controlled, I don't mean rigged. I mean it's very difficult to make any adjustments and improvements if you're lacking in some area, quite clearly, because a lot of teams just fall into that category. So I don't know. I'm just not a fan of any of that. And I think I mean, you know, I don't know whether you're asking this question, but I think a great driver is a great driver, and he will always look good in whatever he's driving. And if you want to go straight from Formula 3 to Formula 1, it's totally doable. If you want to go from Formula 4 to Formula 2, that's totally doable. And it's all a question of how good you are and how talented you are as a driver. And you don't need this structure that we have, which is incredibly expensive, to you know, to show that. And I think there's something else Grand Prix teams, Formula One is missing, which is that they still treat Formula 2 as the poor second cousin. It's very difficult for a driver to get a bunch of passes to go into the Formula 1 paddock for potential sponsors. It's very difficult for a Formula 2 team trying to generate sponsorship, even to do hospitality in the Formula 2 paddock. You've got to do it in a big communal area. You can't do it nicely around your own team with your own drivers. And it's ridiculously expensive. You know, it is insanely expensive to do Formula 3 and Formula 2. So a lot of the very talented drivers never get to show what they can really do. And that's the problem with it all. So Formula 1 should divest itself of Formula 2 and Formula 3, in my opinion. They should become standalone championships in their own right. And we should go back to proper racing cars with both of those categories. Max Flashark, greetings Peter in chat. Hi Max, hit the like button. Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you very much. Apparently Zave says a news reporter did a sick April Fool's joke, decided and deleted that article about Mercedes. Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it's a good point here. Herbert Williams saying Formula 1 cars are compared to Formula 2. Well, yeah, Formula 2 probably quicker up the hill at Suzuka now. Oops, shouldn't be saying that. Certainly Super Formula cars would be, I would guess. I mean, Super Formula is a good example, isn't it? It's what Formula 2 should be, because it's, you know, it's obviously a Japanese formula, but it's, you know, it's a nice Dallara chassis. There's a mix between the Honda and the Toyota engines. It's very quick. It's sort of 550, 600 horsepower, Yokohama tires. And look at the number of European drivers going over there now and doing well, but not blowing away the Japanese drivers. And that's because it's a very, very difficult formula. And that's what Formula 2 should be. It's a great category. And that's how I'd like Formula 2 Europe to look, that sort of car as well. The only thing I'm not massively into, that even there they have a push to pass thing, don't they? Which is a bit annoying, but you know, I suppose that's one concession we can make. So we go April Fool's, Cadillac. Herbert Williams says Cadillac has GM's Indy engine. Yeah, right. I'm still feeling very odd about that whole Cadillac thing. You know, I love the idea that Mario and Michael wanted to do a Formula 1 team, I'm not convinced that what we've got now is the product of that. But anyway, I don't know. I think it's the whole Cadillac thing, isn't it? I don't know. Maybe it's just the era in which I grew up, but for me, Cadillacs have never really been proper cars, and they, you know, are proper cars now. What's the point of Cadillac doing Formula One? They're supposed to be building Rolls-Royce type cars for Americans, aren't they? Isn't that what a Cadillac is? It's an American Rolls-Royce. You don't expect Rolls-Royce to do Formula One. The image isn't right. I know they do all that sports car stuff, but you know, that's different. Max says April Fool's better than papaya rules. Well, yeah, okay, yeah, good one. Andre Anderson says it's not Formula One anymore; it's Formula E, which, you know, comes back to my point that Formula One, when Bernie was running it, should have had the brains to adopt its own Formula E and not allow Jean Todt to go away and do a separate Formula E. And that's what should have happened. But because Bernie at one point famously said, you know, the internet's not going to happen or something about the internet was never going to work. Presumably felt the same way about electric cars and Formula One being seen to go electric in some form or another, or at least E-friendly, and therefore didn't do it. But had Formula One then, when at the moment Todd said he was threatening was to give full commercial rights standing to Formula E, to a GAG's Formula E, Formula One should then have said, no, we'll do our own Formula E. We'll take this one. Thank you very much, Mr. Todd. And we will have it all part of our umbrella. And that's how we're going to protect the real Formula One and keep it what it should be. Very close, very noisy, very fuel burning, very tire burning, albeit with fuels that are environmentally positive. And he didn't do that. You know, he said, okay, go and do Formula E. We'll do our thing. And then look at the mess we're in now. So there you go. Warland says, these 26 rules are Max rules designed to get him out of Formula One. Well, I don't think they were designed for that, but I think that could well be a result. And there may be a lot of people who are happy about that. I don't know. I'm not. I think it's a terrible thing if Max leaves Formula One. But I fear he will if... and the problem is, you see, everyone will say he's a crybaby because the only way he possibly will leave Formula One will be if Red Bull don't become any better than basically they are now, and this is the car he's got all year. And then as I keep saying, I would not blame him then for walking away from it all because he can't do anything. He can't do anything in that bad car. Whereas before he could do something in a bad car and make it a little bit better around the lap. And then he could defend during the race, having got a higher grid position than the car deserved. But you can't do that now. And that's why he might well go away. But people will take that and say, oh, well, he's just a crybaby. Just because he's not winning, he doesn't want to race anymore. And that's, you know, people are inevitably going to say that. But they'll be wrong if they do. So, okay, Sarah says, haha, forget the day, work at home. Right. Kind of. Herbert Williams says, well, Formula E might help solve Formula One. Well, it would if Formula One had done what I've said they should have done all those years ago when Todd and Bernie were running everything, and Formula One had adopted Formula E. And it would have been great. But nobody listened. Nobody listened. It's much too late now. Max Flashart says, make qualifying great again. Well, the only way that's going to happen is if they get into different cars for qualifying. They'll get into Super Formula cars for qualifying and then back into the race cars. But then the race is still going to be rubbish, isn't it? Anyway, Andretti Global Formula One team. Peter, history repeats itself. There was a video from '85 when Williams joined with Honda. They built a building with Honda into their factory. Frank Williams talked to Peter Collins about the season. Quite sure how that's repeating itself. It's exactly what Aston Martin did not do, isn't it? They let Honda continue to run the engine development program in Japan. Whereas when Honda came into Formula One with Spirit and Stefan Johansson, they were kind of all over the place in terms of where they wanted to be based and how the development program was going to work. And when Frank signed his contract with Kawamoto at the end of '83 to start racing with Honda engines in '84, the first thing Patrick said was, well, in that case, I want to see what Honda are doing, and we're going to install 2 dynos with Honda in our factory here at Didcot. And we'll have an office here for Honda in our factory so that I can keep an eye on what's going on. It's the first thing Patrick did. And it's exactly what happened. And the car was a difficult car in 84. The throttle lag was terrible. And the throttle response was therefore very difficult for drivers Keke Rosberg and Jacques Lafitte. But at the end of 84, Nigel Mansell tested that car, the 09 Honda, for the first time at Donington, memorably still wearing his John Player Special black and gold overalls as he climbed into the white and green Williams. And within 5 laps said, horrendous throttle lag. That's what we used to have at Renault before they went to the much smaller turbos, twin turbos. What's going on? And so the Honda people all said, oh, wow. And they went away, came back with smaller turbos, and immediately the throttle response problem was improved. And that's what happened. But a lot of that was Patrick being on top of Honda from day one. And that is not what happened, as far as I can see, at Aston Martin. They did the opposite. They let Honda go off, and they did exactly what McLaren did. Let Honda go off and do their own thing in Japan, and look what happened. Sarah says, I dove in those regs and I saw that problem and I thought, no, I can be right. I'm not an engineer, but a lawyer. But no, it turns out I did understand why didn't engineers warn about this. Yeah. Fermi says, no question, Peter. Just wanted to say good day and love your content. Thank you very much. Sorry, Sarah, I'm not dismissing your point. I just don't really understand it. That's all. But if you can come back and explain it a bit more. Terminator, Peter, can Formula One reverse it all back to what was last season at least? Well, as I said, you know, if they went back even to last year, it would be somewhat better. Of course it would. And then I presume Audi are going to complain, are they? Because we've got MGUHs back on the car. I don't know. You know, I really don't know. I suppose Mercedes would complain, wouldn't they, too? Because they would say, well, we got an advantage now. Now you're taking away our advantage. Blah, blah, blah. Andretti again. This is not the real Andretti, but anyway, great name you have for your thing. Peter, he talks about sending tires and parts to Honda so they could test the engine. On YouTube, type in The Making of 10. It's all about 11 minutes. Frank Williams. Yeah, I know. I made that film, The Making of 10. It's my film, mate. I made it with Patrick Uden. So yeah, I know all about it. And the only thing that annoyed me about that was the first time I discovered this movie, The Making of 10, which is how we made FW10 and made it with Patrick. The only thing that annoyed me was that Alison Moyet had a great song at the time that was absolutely perfect for that video. And we tried and tried and tried to get the rights to use that. And we didn't in the end because it would have been absolutely perfect. But otherwise, I was very pleased with that film. And yeah, you know, it was Williams getting on top of the Honda situation. And also along the way, we did our first proper female mold chassis and changed the livery and all that stuff. You know, it was a great car. And I've got a lot of the wind tunnel in that movie as well. So yeah, that was the wind tunnel that originally started at Specialized Moldings with Peter Jackson, and at Frank Durney's request, Patrick went to see and decided to buy it, and it was trucked over to Didcot, down to Didcot in Williams, and we set up in the room there and set it up as a lovely quarter scale wind tunnel with rolling road. That was the thing. It had a rolling road, and it was a pretty good wind tunnel at the time. Very good. And that factory was a great factory. It was all brand new. And why was Frank at Didcot? There's another question. I wonder how many people know that. Because he'd started his racing life at Slough, where a lot of race teams were based, including John Wyer, Lola, McLaren very near there. And Frank was there at John Wyer, near John Wyer in Slough. But when he rebooted the team in 77, he went to Didcot, which was much further west, very big, very near a big railway hub, big railway station there at Didcot. So it had a very quick connection into London, which was a good thing. It still wasn't that far from Heathrow. But he went to Didcot because Didcot was in terrible state at that time, and the local government was giving out free land grants to anybody that wanted to sort of set up an industrial unit. I think it was 3 years free rent or something like that. So Frank was in there straight away under the arches initially, the railway arches, with the shop, on which he won the 80 and 81 championships. And then we moved to Didcot in around 83, around 84, 85. Yeah, around there. And Didcot was, it was again, it was almost purpose built. They were building these industrial units anyway, very near the big cooling towers, which was coal to electricity cooling towers. And yeah, it was a great factory and lots of room there to expand for Honda. Aston Martin, take note. Secrets at Maritain. After June the 1st, unless Ferrari using the same compression ratio trick, the Mercedes and McLarens should be around 0.3 a second a lap slower. Will the Ferraris then be winning 1-2? I'll tell you what, it's a good point, isn't it? Because if there are more circuits where they're only running the ice through the first sector, as we had in Suzuka, then actually that compression ratio disadvantage may be even greater. If you see what I mean. I think that point, I think, the disadvantage of the 0.3 that people have built into it is based on a lap as distinct from the sectors now in which you're actually using the ice. So if they're using the ice more than they anticipated at the start of the year, it may have an even bigger effect. Interesting point, isn't it? Will Ferrari be winning 1-2? Toto's too clever to allow that to happen, I think. And he may well now be negotiating with the FIA changes that the FIA think they may want to make in order to improve Formula One. But Toto's clever enough to be thinking, and when we get to the compression ratio equality thing, we still need the advantage of this and that. So we must make sure they don't touch that. And we he'll be thinking that way. I don't know what those things are, but he ain't stupid. And I don't think it'll be as simple as that. Removing the MGH can deal with, but not allowing the battery MGUK to spin up the turbo seems short-sighted. Yeah, well, that was another thing, wasn't it? It's all power related, energy related. They're so fixated on this, how Formula One can regain its energy. It's almost the message they wanted to send out to the world is how clever Formula One cars are regaining the energy around the lap, rather than being very fast racing cars that bring the best out in the world's best drivers and produce therefore the best racing. It was like, okay, that's good. Yeah, it's over there. Much more important. We want to show the world how we can regenerate energy around the lap. Well, you can do that with a tractor. You can do that with any sort of electric road car. Why do we need to use Formula One for all this? And you're right. That's another thing, isn't it? But I disagree with you. I think the MGUH would solve a lot of problems and they should bring that back. And they've got enough time to do it now, probably, maybe. I don't know. Zavesh Dogal. Aston Martin said the Newey chassis is not good in high-speed corners. Really? How do they know that? I think that's because they underestimated how much the high-speed corners have become medium-speed corners. Ha, ha, ha. Yeah, well, that's a good point, isn't it? I'm surprised they know anything about the car at all in terms of how it handles. They haven't gone quick enough, have they? PH, not Patrick Head, I don't think, but anyway, the FIA could have simplified the engines and added slight electrical element. A slight, I think there needs to be an italics there, electrical element. Wouldn't that have been better than these complex rules which require so much compromise? They had to add active arrow. Well, yeah, absolutely right. But of course, we already had a slight electrical element in the previous regulations, and that wasn't good enough for them. They had to do something more, have to be given a job. So if we've got something that's working well, and it's 60-40 hybrid or whatever it was, no, it was 70-30, wasn't it? Then let's make it 60-40 or 50-50. Let's give ourselves a major challenge and mess everything up. It's kind of what it was. We need to be seen to be doing this to encourage these new manufacturers to come into the sport. Well, we got Audi. We still don't have Toyota. Still don't have Porsche. We still don't have a lot of other companies. And we don't have a German Grand Prix and we don't have a French Grand Prix. There are other things to be worrying about, more important, I think, than messing around with the formula that was working pretty well relative to what we have today. But even the formula we had up until last year was nothing like as good as V10s and V8s, in my opinion. In terms of cost, in terms of racing, in terms of all we needed to do really, I think, is run the V8 formula with a massive focus on alternative fuels and develop all that area. And Formula One is seen to be the world's pace setter of alternative fuels. And along the way, it should have adopted its own Formula E, of course. And we have, you know, how much is made of the fact that the wheel changing practice car at Red Bull is an electric Formula One car? How much is made of that? We never see pictures of it. It's not Red Bull's fault. Formula One should be doing something. They should be insisting all Formula One teams have that sort of thing. And we go electric, and we do a lot more about the footprint, and everybody comes back on their stupid motorhomes, and we have much smaller motorhomes that don't use up anything like the same amount of fuel when they're going from race to race. And we make everything a lot more compact in the way Formula One can do it beautifully. But we don't play around with the key element, which is the actual race cars. We still produce a great Formula One for great drivers. And we have a supporting race, which is at 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock every Sunday morning, which is a Formula E race in which Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc all compete in the Ferrari Formula E car, the Red Bull Formula E, all of which would have happened if Formula One had done its own Formula E championship. Then nobody would be able to criticize Formula One for not being at the cutting edge of, you know, progressive technology. That's what needed to happen, instead of which it didn't. And so they're doing all these compromises and nobody seems to know the direction in which to go. We had a hybrid engine, but let's make it even more hybrid. Let's have more electric. To what end? And what are we going to do then about the great corners and the great drivers and defense? Nobody asked those questions, and it just went down one panic road after another. Andretti, Peter, 85, the documentary on making the Williams. Yes, I know. Making of 10. Thanks very much. Actually sponsored by Mobil. I've got to give a lot of credit there to Dan Nelson and Jan Stransky of Mobil, who made that happen. Thank you very much. The Making of 10. It's a great video. Well, I say great. I shouldn't be saying that because I made it with Patrick Uden, but you know, it was a lot of fun. I wonder if old Mark Slade's woken up yet. Let's have a look. Oh yes, here he is. Mark Slade's response. Brilliant. Hi Peter. That's putting me on the spot! Exclamation mark. This is a response to the question: if Mark was running the FIA now, what cars would he prescribe for Formula One? From a pure fan point of view, I'd love to go back to normally aspirated engines of maybe 4-cylinder capacity with no limits on number of cylinders or format. Sorry. Let me restart that. From a pure fan point of view, I'd love to go back to normally aspirated engines of maybe 4-litre capacity with no limits on number of cylinders or format. So straight sixes or V16s would be allowed, even if unlikely. They would sound great! Exclamation mark. And I think they would. But there's a good chance no one would want to supply an engine, and I wouldn't want a spec engine formula. So I think that is unrealistic. To be honest, I'd be happy with keeping the current engines as hybrids, but with an MGUH and front axle energy recovery, which is what I've been saying for a lot of this live stream. Bring back MGUH. Recovering 330 kilowatts would be straightforward with no need for superclipping. So ban that, superclipping banned, yeah. And probably little need for lift and coast, except in races the drivers might still do that for balance and tire preservation, which is okay. The cars with better balance and more grip don't need to lift and coast as much, which is the way it should be. The MGUH would get around the start concerns, and the straight line speed differentials between standard and overtake could be reduced, and without superclipping and much less lift and coast, the chances of a Behrman type incident would be massively reduced. The only negative would be the sound, but I don't see a way around that without getting rid of turbos. Maybe front and rear axle entry recovery combined with straightforward, normally aspirated 1.5 litre combustion engines of unrestricted format would be the ideal balance of noise and variety of engine supplier. I'll go with that last spec, best of both worlds. So the last spec was front and rear axle entry recovery combined, so in other words, MGUH, combined with straightforward, normally aspirated 1.5 litre combustion engines of unrestricted format. Ideal balance of noise and variety. So effectively, whereas we used to have 1.5 litre normally aspirated, 3 litre normally aspirated or 1.5 litre turbo, what we're now saying is effectively the turbo is replaced by the electric side of the balance. I'll go with that last spec. I think the key thing there that he's saying ultimately is bring back MGUH, which is what I'm saying. So there you go. Max Flashart says, this is amazing. I hope you're referring to the live stream. Probably not. Practic Borol. What are the chances we might get any meaningful changes to the current PUs? It's not like they'll stop racing due to the commercial side and Audi and road relevance thing. Long lead times on PUs too. Well, bring back MGUH. Bye-bye, Audi. Or maybe not. Maybe they'll think, nah, we'll do this. You know, I bring back MGUH. It does solve a lot of the problems, as I've been saying, as Mark has now agreed. Glenn Sequeira. Hi, Peter. It's a bit disheartening to think we might not witness another overtake quite as clinical as Max's move on Oscar at Imola last year. Well, that's a good point, isn't it? Because that actually, that first corner of any given Grand Prix is about the only place in the entire weekend where you actually will get a proper overtake. In theory, they've all got a reasonable amount of power to get off the grid, and assuming it's not too long a run down to the first corner, which is a big assumption at some circuits, of course, but assuming it's relatively near, then you will still have a proper overtake. That's the only overtake. I mean, Oscar, full marks, Japan, and, you know, Charles Leclerc, Lewis, good job, first two races. So, yeah, they have been overtakes, but it's what, 3 seconds, and that's it, and it's all over. So what you're going to get is fans probably watching the first lap, and that's about it. But then another big given there, of course, is that if you're talking about Max versus Oscar, Max has got to get off the line as well as Oscar. And that's a big ask, given how badly the Red Bulls have been going in the last 3 races off the line. Max Flashout, I think, is coming up with a logo for a new T-shirt here in the Windsor merchandising store, which doesn't seem to do any business whatsoever. And I've got a bloke who keeps saying, oh, yeah, we're going to change all that. We'll get the merchandising going soon, Peter. And I say, yeah, okay, if and when. But yeah, let's have a T-shirt saying, make corners great again. And probably a red cap. No, we won't do a red cap. We'll do a blue cap. Make corners great again. Yeah, good. Good idea, Max. Thank you. Robert Buckingham. I was just watching the highlights of that race. He's talking to Glenn Sequeira here and was going to mention the visible speed difference of the 25 car, and the passes were amazing. Yeah, well, I mean, it's sad, isn't it? I don't want to have to repeat it, but up the hill, they're only using 500 horsepower, normally aspirated engines. There was no electric in there, as far as I know, up the hill at Suzuka through the S's. 500 horsepower, you know. I mean, they used to weigh 550, I think, 530 when we had 500 horsepower in Formula One. Now it's like 20% more weight for the same power. What would Mario Andretti say about that? He probably doesn't want to know about it. The one shot we saw of Mario in the garage, I don't think he's been to any more races in Melbourne. He didn't look very impressed with it all, did he? Icarus says, Charles is one of the most intelligent drivers on the grid. I'd say he's probably the most intelligent, isn't he? His adaptability to new regs and his ability to compete with Merc cars in the last 3 races was great. Talent with intelligence is a lethal combo. Not sure I agree with you there. I've got a great belief in drivers can be too intelligent for Formula One. I always thought DC was a bit too intelligent for Formula One, to be honest. Thought about things a bit too much. I think Jonathan Palmer was a bit too intelligent. Who else was there? I think maybe Patrick Tambay was as well. You know, I think Patrick was very close friends with Gilles, but I'm not saying Gilles was in any way not intelligent. He was, but he was very Max Verstappenish. You know, he knew what he liked, and that was what he talked about. But you know, Patrick could talk about anything in the world, in politics to the economy. Carlos Reutemann, another bit too intelligent to be a racing driver, probably, or a very, very successful Formula One driver. So I'm not sure it is. I'm not sure intelligent. What you're talking about there, his adaptability to the new regs. I mean, let's not confuse that with Max's ability to adapt to the new regs. Max's ability is absolutely brilliant. It's just that the Red Bull is a horrendous car now. And these new regs, for the first time in the history of the sport, do not allow a driver like Charles or Max to do anything to make up for the deficiencies. Whereas if the car's 90% there, as the Ferrari is, of course, you can do a little bit. You've got a bit more input on what you can do. That's the difference between these regulations and any others. Put another way, if you put Charles in the Red Bull, he wouldn't be going any differently from Max. So, yeah, that's just to make that point. We shouldn't get too carried away with that. But having said that, yeah, Charles driving beautifully. Lewis, though, you know, you got to say Lewis has really taken advantage of these regulations to bring himself up to within a couple of tenths of Charles, a couple of place positions in the race over a Grand Prix distance. And again, it's because I think there's a couple of areas in which Charles is no longer able to show what he can really do in a car, into specific corners. Into one is a good example. Doesn't give him a reward anymore. It gives a reward to George Russell. But he's doing a good job, as is, as are many drivers on the grid. Jez Davis says the camera work in 130R was as restrained as the engines. Total parody. Yeah. Gasly is dreamy, says Harvin. What does that mean? That means I think you like him. Is that right? He is a good bloke, Gasly. I've got a lot of time for Pierre. Know him quite well. I've known him for quite a long time. And he's just a good bloke. I mean, whether you think about the way his family got around him to help him raise the budget to go racing when it became really difficult before the Red Bulls stepped in of this world, and that, how and his perseverance, very Nigel Mansell-esque. Not that Nigel had much family members around with money to help him. And then that day at Silverstone, when he had that horrendous road crash going to the F2 race, and his mum was quite seriously injured, and he just got out of the car. His mum, he wanted to go to the hospital. His mum said, don't even think about it. Go on and do your race. And he blitzed the race. That's Pierre Gasly. Great guy. At Jim Clark. It's annoying that you've got that name. Anyway, congratulations. The rally you went to the other week, it wasn't the Periana hill climb, was it? No, it wasn't a hill climb. No, it was La Nucia rally, which was the opening round of the Spanish Super Championship, which is Rally 2 cars, which are just below Rally 1, really impressive. Tarmac rally in the mountains about 2 hours north of where we live here, northwest of Benidorm is the way to describe it. And just really great roads. I mean, quite often I go up there with Jack just for a Sunday afternoon just to drive the Hyundai i20N or the Skoda Rally 2 there and have some fun. Just get back into grassroots of what driving, within reason, obviously safely as one does. A nice car on nice roads, all cambered. Some of them have got the apex falls away and you can really dip the car down and it's a drain, but you've got to be a bit careful because sometimes there's rocks there falling down from the rocks, the cliffs above. Beautifully smooth roads, S's, hairpins, downhill, uphill, just goes on forever. And this rally is a famous rally. Jos Verstappen did it a couple of years ago in his Skoda. And there's a YouTube clip of him locking up, going straight on into an Armco barrier and the car being towed away. But he, the upshot of that bit of video is, good job there was an Armco barrier there. And yeah, it was really good. And I say it was won by my mate, Cojete, who is Suarez, who is just so quick. He's such a nice guy. And he's got this brilliant Skoda Rally 2, and drives for the factory team, Spanish factory team, and he's as quick as anybody out there, I think. Obviously, he's not quite. He doesn't focus on ERC anymore, European Rally Championship anymore. He's had a few goes at that. Didn't have the budget, but he's put together this operation in Spain now, which has now lifted him to the level of Hayden Paddon and those guys, and he's just superb to watch. And we're going to another rally fairly soon, which happens also to be the opening round of the European Rally Championship here in Spain. Can't believe it, in Cordoba. So we're going to go up there. That's northwest of Madrid. And we're going to watch that. Looking forward to that. ERC and Spanish Super Championship all in together, all Rally 2 cars. And the new Lancia Rally 2 car will be making its official ERC debut, even though we did see it in La Nucia. Very impressive too. Lovely to watch. Right, so that's that. My bit of rallying stuff. But yeah, Suarez. Watch out for him. Cojete Suarez. Just great driver. Oof, a lot of questions to get through. It's already, 1:45 here. I started at 11. How am I going to do this? I better go through and see if there's any super chats that I haven't dealt with. I'm very spoiled, aren't I? All these people, all of you, keeping these live streams what they are, just amazing. I'm going to do a lot more in this period, this 5-week period, because I'm sure the Formula One teams aren't going to do anything. They're all on holiday, taking a break. And so I'm just going through to see if there's any. There's a lot of members now. We've had a lot of, I think we're about 110 members now on the channel. So thank you very much, everybody who's subscribed as a member. And I'm going to continue to do as much great content, additional content for you. Sometimes it'll be stuff after a qualifying or race session, as we had in Japan. Sometimes it'll be special guests, interviews, which we'll subsequently make public. Or it'll just be a video that we make you get the first look at for a couple of days, and then we go public with it. Excuse me, while I got to say, while I sneeze. Am I going to sneeze? Not quite. Sorry. It's my mum's thing, you know. She hated that when she couldn't quite sneeze. Used to drive her mad. Max Flashheart said, there's hard racing and there's dirty racing. I agree. You know, you draw the line at anything on the straight, in my opinion. And I don't mean the braking area here. I mean the straight when they're flat out in top gear. Charles Leclerc against Lewis Hamilton, against Max in Spanish Grand Prix last year. Please note, Lance Stroll twice already in his career on the straight. Horrendously dangerous. And of course, basically what we saw with Colapinto against Berman in Japan. Had a super chat here, which is US F1 can replace Audi F1. Bring back MGUH. Yeah, well, I'd love to be able to do that. I know that we'd still, those people we were going to use still would do a great job, and I think we could be right there. But anyway, that time has passed, sadly. And there's lots to look forward to for the future, particularly, hopefully, bringing back the MGUH. But thank you very much indeed for that. Very kind. We're talking, I suppose, who would you trust on track? Yeah, well, I would, you know, if I was Max, which I'm not, of course, and I was racing wheel to wheel with Charles, I would not trust him on the straights. I'd trust him everywhere else, but not on the straights. That's the first thing. And I wouldn't trust Stroll either. And who else? I'd probably give Liam a bit of a wide berth, I think. He hasn't done very much dirty recently, but I'm not sure he would be that, you know, well behaved if he was in a strong position in a race. I don't know, maybe wrong there. So here we go. Foamy Media. Max has been like a spoilt brat in racing, same as Seb. Well, I know that's an obvious reaction to people that are going to say, if I can't win, I'm going to get out of this sport. And just to repeat the point is not that he's not winning and therefore he's out of the sport, because we've seen him in a car that isn't capable of winning before and how well he drives it. The point is that the new regulations do not allow a driver like Max, compared with, say, a driver like Isaac Hadjar, who's much younger and nothing like his experience, but potentially can be extremely, extremely good. There's no difference between them now, basically, because Max can't use any of the things that he does well in these cars if the car is not up there in terms of balance and grip. There's nothing he can do to improve it. He's just another driver at the mercy, basically, of the engineers, because it's all controlled by how you harvest and manage the power. That is the point. And if you're in a quick car with balance and grip, which I mean grip level, like a Mercedes, like a Ferrari, like a McLaren, of course, then there are a few things you can do in addition to your teammate. Of course there are. You can maybe run a little bit less downforce here, or you can do this or that. But in reality, even then it's pretty tight. And so the difference between this year and last year, the number of tools in your toolkit. And so that is what it's all about. And I think it would be wrong to call Max a spoilt brat, to be honest. Truffle says, Max just brings karting to the Formula One track. In karting, you get glorified for what he does. In Formula One, vilified. But then again, the Formula One press always has an agenda. Well, yeah, I think you're right. You know, I don't know. I don't really want to talk about, I was going to say my colleagues, but they're not really, are they? Because I never really see them and chat to them anymore. But I think the press are these days so limited in the access they have to the drivers and the engineers that they just draw the same conclusions as you, the fans, which is a very sad thing, because in theory, the press should have the inside track on what's really happening and what the drivers are really thinking. And yet it's all so stage managed now that they can't do that. The problem is that as a result, most of the journalism is based around getting a quote from a driver and then or an engineer, and then writing an article around that quote. Usually that means the quote inevitably has been taken out of context, and it all goes wrong from there. Very few journalists, as far as I can see, not that I do look at it very much, but very few journalists, whenever somebody mentions something here, seem to be expressing their own opinion as distinct from what they've managed to get prod a driver into saying. I suspect that Mark Hughes probably does not fall into that category, and there are several others. Matt Bishop would be another, but most of the young guys tend to survive on getting quotes, which is always a rocky road to ruin. Okay. There's a lot of inter-chat now about dirty driving and stuff. I'll leave that all to you lot to talk about. Alonso and Hamilton can make a bad car look good. I think Alonso can, yeah, these days. He's always, well, he always looks like Fernando Alonso, no matter what he's driving. Except when you see other cars around him and you see how quickly they're going relative to the Aston Martin. But yeah, he's always got this talent of making the car look beautifully square on the road. And although he may say, I've got this, I've got that, you never really see it because he's so good at just keeping everything square. And it's as if his whole brain and his eyes and everything is just perfectly in equilibrium with Fernando. Speaking of which, it's so sad, isn't it, that Kalle Rovanperä is not doing, say, Equilibrium. Is not doing Super Formula this year, and indeed probably won't race now. I would imagine be quite difficult for him to go from Super Formula, where he's got giddiness and doesn't feel comfortable, to something else. He may try it, but I just wish he would come back to rallying. It's no big deal. Nobody make a fuss about it. Rallying people are very cool. And, you know, maybe Ogier might retire at the end of this year. There's a nice spot for him again back at Toyota. I just hope that happens now. I'd love to see Kalle again in a rally car if he's not going to go racing. Anyway, Hamilton can make a good car look good. Make a bad car look good. Not so sure about that these days. I think, didn't George Russell make a bad Mercedes look a little bit better than Lewis did? No, well, in terms of on his own in a bad car, Lewis will never be that much out of line. He'll never be, you know, fighting chronic understeer. He'll always be keeping the car pretty much on the straight and narrow in terms of managing the dynamic weight. That has not gone away. And he'll always be able to induce a little bit of nice oversteer at some point. But yeah, I think in terms of making a bad car look good, I'd say Fernando has possibly slightly got the edge there. So Sarah says Senna was an aggressive driver. He was indeed a very aggressive driver, to the point where he was over aggressive, actually, in my opinion. Speak to Martin Brundle about his days in Formula 3 with Ayrton Senna, when Ayrton was driving for West Surrey Engineering, Dick Bennett's, and Martin was in the Eddie Jordan car. And a lot of brake testing that year. So Foamy comes back on that comment about Fernando. Alonso hasn't had a decent car since he left McLaren the first time. Well, it's not strictly true. I mean, the Ferrari wasn't bad, was it? But anyway, so he would have, learn, teach, learn. He would have beaten Lewis Hamilton if it were not for Dennis's bias. What's that nonsense all about? Sorry, I don't want to be disrespectful. But what does that mean? What bias did Ron Dennis have? As far as I know, he did what he had never done before, which was break a contract with Carbon Industry, which was based on a lot of bonus money, because Fernando wanted to run Hitco brakes halfway through the year. And he eventually decided, well, you know, I've got to be equal here. I'm going to let Fernando do it. If he wants to run Hitcos, we'll let him run Hitcos. If that isn't favouring Fernando, I'd like to know what is. I don't get that comment at all. What else did he do that was biased towards Lewis? I don't get it. Bearing in mind, a lot of what happened that year in terms of the fine and everything was due to the fact that Ron Dennis had the audacity to sign Lewis Hamilton. There's no way a lot of the Formula One powers that be wanted Lewis in the sport. We all know how they were all pushing for Gary Paffett to have that drive. And then Ron decided to go with his belief and sign Lewis. Good luck to him. Good on him. So, right, there's a lot of chat going on. Let's get on to something else. Foamy on the limit. On the Limit says, Peter, I've only been watching Formula One since 2002, but it seems every era felt there needed to be changes to rules and regs to improve the show. Was there ever an era where everyone was happy? Well, it's kind of what I was saying in my monologue at the start of the video, that we've always had change in Formula One. And yes, you could say, if something's good, why do we need to keep changing it all the time? Well, a lot of it was based on what engine was available at the time, what the regulations were defining the cars that you could build, what the state of the world economy, how much money there was, etc., etc. If you look at, let's say, a good example was 1965, when everything was going really well with 1.5 litre Formula One cars, beautifully balanced in terms of size and weight to the circuits on which they were racing. No seat belts in those days, no rollover bars, but no injuries, no fatalities at all in 1965. A great season of Formula One. And then in 66, they changed everything because they felt that 1.5 litre cars were not quick enough and Formula One needed to be more powerful and faster. And they were going to go to 3 litre. So they doubled the size of the engine capacity. And along the way in doing that, they said, oh, and by the way, well, you can run a 1.5 litre if you want to run a turbo engine on it. So it was either 1.5 litre turbo or 3 litre normally aspirated. And that was because of a speed thing more than anything else. And sure enough, inevitably what happened, lots of fatalities, and the Formula One cars quickly outgrew the circuits on which they were racing. So there was a good example of the FIA and the people influencing the FIA not having any clue what they were doing and how much they were going to injure the sport and change the sport and the number of drivers that would be killed as a result. If you fast forward it to recent times, most of the changes have been based around Bernie saying the cars are too slow. I want them to go 5 seconds a lap quicker, which is what he did up to, I think it was 2013, around there. And then from 14, you've got the Bahrain civil war and Bernie and Todd falling out over Bernie bringing Todd to Bahrain and making him look like an idiot when the race should have been cancelled. And Todd, as a result, going back and basically beginning Formula E on his own to fight Formula One, not to fight it, but to detract from Formula One and to cause Formula One all the confusion in which it finds itself today. Since Formula One went then to this hybrid thing in 2014, and it was difficult at the start, but it would treble the cost of the power units overnight and quadrupled the complexity of the power units overnight. We went from V8s, V10s suddenly to these hybrid engines. You could still argue that Formula One did quite a good job of that. And what it was trying to do was fight Todd's Formula E and be seen to be energy efficient. And since 14, a lot of the changes that have been made under the heading of the cars are much too difficult to overtake. We've got to do something to change the aero balance on the car and the way that the airflow comes out from under the car. Or they've been under the heading of this is too dangerous. We need to be able to improve the rollover hoop here. We've got to have more crash structure here, make the cars heavier there, blah, blah, blah. And so they're driven really by safety and by overtaking. Okay, now we're in 2026. These regulations have not been driven by safety or overtaking or making the cars faster or slower. They've been driven 100% by politics and money. That is the difference. And that's never happened in the history of Formula One. In the past, the FIA has made a lot of mistakes, but in the past, all of the changes have been driven by the things I've just been talking about. And or technical advances like disc brakes instead of drum brakes, or active ride. Yeah, great thing, but too quick, we'll ban that. All of the things to do with performance and speed. These are the first regulations in the history of Formula One driven entirely by a manufacturer basically saying, if we're going to come in, this is how we want the regulations for the engine to be. And equally, the commercial rights holders, and don't forget that commercial rights holders did not exist until recent history. Back in the period I was referring to in the 60s, there were no commercial rights holders. So nobody worried or cared about how much money Formula One made or how it looked on the global stage. But we have that now. So the commercial rights holders aren't racing people. They're not engineers. They're not technicians. They're not Formula One people. They're Wall Street people. They only care about the bottom line. And they're very good at media, and they're very good at showbiz, and they're very good at making movies. And that's basically what is govern these 2026 regulations. That's why it is the way it is. And when you say, was there ever an era in which everyone was happy? I would say 1965 was probably the last time. No, that's obviously untrue. There was a time when, well, let's call it the late let's call it the 70s and 80s, when the Cosworth engine was just a brilliant engine that was super reliable, very quick. You could buy a batch of them for sort of 6 or 7 for the year, and that's all you needed. You could buy a car off the shelf and you could go motor racing, as Frank Williams did in 1977. He had a March Cosworth and he only did the European rounds, just one car. Was Frank happy then? Absolutely. You know, was Patrick Head happy? Absolutely, because he had a March that he was modifying and improving, and then he was doing his own car for 78. Everyone was happy. They were happy. Of course, things could have been better from a safety point of view, from a circuit and car safety point of view. But in terms of the regulations of the cars, everyone was very happy. And it all changed with turbos and safety and the advent of turbos, and Renault discovering that 1.5 litre turbo loophole was actually a major card and that they could play it well. And then it all changed again. Speeds went up, and then the control came in of speed. And then, of course, we had the Hockenheim agreement of Bernie in 1993, when he rushed up and down the paddock in Hockenheim, got everybody to agree to the banning of all driver aids and electronic devices on the cars. Didn't do a completely perfect job on that, because we still have active diffs on the cars today, but he did a reasonable job on it in terms of getting what he wanted. I'm not saying it was the right thing to do by any means. I think we should go back to active ride right now. It'd be another thing I would push for. But that's, you know, those things again were driven by speed, by cost, and then later on overtaking became more difficult. They were never driven purely by the economics and politics of wanting Formula One to be worth more money at the end of the year. And that's where we're at today. That's why it is what it is today. Sarah says, I can spot a simple lawyer engineers would, of course, can't really get the bottom of that one, Sarah, sorry. Why are Lewis Hamilton supporters like this? I'm not quite sure what that means. The best era was the late 80s. Well, you're probably talking about, yeah, that era, McLaren 88. 87 maybe, the turbos, 1100 horsepower. It wasn't, if you look at the great racing down through the grid, you'd get a lot of people, you did then, saying, well, you know, it's all right at the front, there's not much going on elsewhere. These, you know, the Williams are so much quicker than everything else, McLarens. But again, you know, the proof was there. If you've got good racing, proper racing between two great drivers in a great team, that's just about all you want. And look at, you know, Mansell Piquet in 87, 86, and look at Senna Prost in 88. You know, that's what people remember those years for. And I can tell you right now that the pass that Nigel pulled off against Piquet in the British Grand Prix 87, which stands as one of the great passes of all time, would not have happened in the 2026 cars. No way you could do that. For a start, there'd be clipping, super clipping, going into Stowe, wouldn't they? Same thing for that pass he pulled off against Berger into Piratella in Mexico on the whatever, the second last lap of the race, around the outside when it was a very, very quick corner. You wouldn't do that either. So yeah, very different. But it is annoying, you know, I know what you're saying. Why, if something is good, why do things always have to change? A lot of it is driven, in terms of teams, it's driven by engine suppliers pulling out of the sport, or tire company changes, or something else like that. So Sarah says, I was lucky to see the 70s and 80s. Well, yeah, so was I. I was lucky to work in those eras in the sport, so I was very lucky. Max Flash Up, having software change modes to comply with the regulations to stop exploits is in fact changing major power without the driver controlled in unexpected ways. Yeah. And there was a time when they wanted to stop driver aids and controlling what the drivers could do from the garage, remember? That was all a big deal. A huge deal in Formula One. No more driver aids. It was a big Max Mosley thing. Now what have they got? You can actually argue that all these things are driver aids. What is it all about? I think that's another t-shirt logo we need to get, isn't it? I know there's so many questions here on this chat box, guys. I'm going to have to just say, look, bear with me, and I'll do another live stream later in the week. We'll try and do 2 a week in this period, because so many good points everybody's making. Foamy Meter says, racing is fixed now for the entertainment value. Next year they will spray the tracks with water so they can control the rain. Formula One has turned into a sim. Yeah, I know. It's terrible, isn't it? Learn, teach, learn. I hated mandatory tyre changes, DRS, and now this is the worst. Grumpy Stiltskin. How long until AI is driving? Max, stop all the automated driver aids. Yeah, I know. Tell me about it. It's terrible, isn't it? Ambarnake. Hi, Peter. Why can't they solve this problem with front axle ERS recuperation? They're not allowed to. The regulations banned the MGUH, and that's it. We had them last year, and they banned them for the 2026 season. So there you go. Max says, the Make Corners Great Again merch is coming soon. Do it. Ripso says, Sky buying Formula One rights killed it for me. I've not watched since. I just get the highlights now on YouTube. Yeah, well, you know. Biochem Girl, the fact that the computer can change the mode unexpected on the year. We just had that one. Happy April Fool's Day, says Bruce Minas. Neymar Senior says, F1 should change its name to Formula One Entertainment because right now it's not a sport. Well, there you go. I think you speak on behalf of many when you say that, Neymar. AZBCDE, overtakes are now no longer overtakes, at least with DRS drivers needed to drive hard to get within 1 second for the overtake. Now all you need to do is press a button, Mario Kart style. Yep, well, I've been saying that from the start of the year. I think when I started saying that in Melbourne, a lot of people did give me a hard time saying, oh, there's lots of overtaking, Peter. What are you talking about? It's brilliant. And then China, it's sort of the groundswell increased. And now we've got the Suzuka, a real racers circuit. And now look what they're saying. The FIA really stands for Fools in April. But to give the FIA their due, it's not only the FIA, of course. They're kind of responding to what they're being told Formula One and its owners, its commercial owners, want it to be. And so, you know, Nicholas Tombazis has done the best job he can within the framework of what he was given. It's not necessarily the FIA overruling Liberty and saying, no, I know you guys at Liberty want to go back to V10s, but we want to go to 50-50 electrification. No, it's not that at all. Learn, teach, learn. He forgot about China when Dennis said we are racing Fernando. He let Kimi win the World Drivers' Championship when McLaren had the best car. Really? I don't think so. Wasn't the China race when Lewis memorably went off? So, quite sure. I don't know. I can't answer that. All I can say is, from where I sat, and I was pretty near to it all, McLaren did a very good job for Fernando Alonso in 2007. The problem was that Fernando had never had a teammate as quick as Lewis Hamilton. And the fact that Lewis was young and I guess British also added to the confusion. And I remember writing a column for F1 Racing in the media center at the Canadian Grand Prix on the Thursday afternoon for the upcoming issue, saying, I suspect what Fernando's going to do now, because he's a very, very cool guy. He's going to say, wow, I've never had a teammate this quick. And I'm actually going to be learning a couple of things from Lewis because he does a couple of things very, very well. Of course, over a season, I'm going to beat him. And of course, there are still lots of things I can do better than Fernando, but it's very refreshing to have a guy this quick pushing me to greater heights. And I remember writing that column saying, I suspect that's what Fernando's going to do. And I was completely wrong. He did the opposite. When Lewis really did start to beat him, which happened to be that Canadian Grand Prix, he did the opposite and started saying that the team are favouring Lewis. How could they do that? And what way would a team like McLaren favour Lewis any more than they favoured Mika in the DC era? They did. Mika just did a better job over the season. Talk to DC about it. A race team can't do that sort of thing. And indeed, they went the other way. They actually, as I say, bent over backwards and gave Fernando his hit code brakes, which nobody in the pit lane thought would ever happen. And yet they did. I can't think of ever that happening again. Maybe Lewis a little bit with the Brembo situation at Ferrari when he first joined. I think they made a few mods there, but they didn't do a massive change like Carbon Industry to Hitco. Just took all the Carbon Industry kit off the car and put Hitcos on for Fernando. And yeah, he did very well with them. And then Monza, very good example, high-speed braking. He was brilliant, and it was a good thing. But it wasn't, you know, but if anything, that just showed how much they were favouring Fernando, because Lewis continued with the carbon industries. Anyway, that's what happened, and I don't really understand why people still think that Fernando was poorly treated by McLaren. Maybe I know Fernando says there's going to be something I'm going to tell the world when I retire about all that. I'm still waiting to think and wonder what it was. Great thoughts, Oz. Our Formula One uncle giving history lesson. I love it. Legit from someone who witnessed it. Well, thank you very much. I'm glad you're calling me an uncle rather than our Formula One old grandfather or whatever some people rudely call me. No, they call me whatever you like. I probably deserve it. Foamy Meter says, in the 70s, Formula One spent 2 hours in the office and 18 in the garage. 2026, you have offices and 600 staff who live in an office. Well, that's right. You know, it is right. I keep saying, wouldn't it be brilliant now if they said, oh, and by the way, you can go testing now for Barcelona for 5 days in this period. Why not? Do it. These Formula One teams have all got far too much money anyway. They're all moaning about it, but they've got too much money, and they should go out and do some testing and get the thing really back onto the straight and narrow with MGUH back on the cars. Bono Bronx says, oh, Peter's catched up. I'm quite sure what that means. Caught up, maybe? I think it probably means, but the questions at the bottom of the thing. I'm just so overwhelmed by how many questions there are. I went to the bottom all of a sudden. Slipstream Merchant. Hi, Peter. Do you think Oscar has gone back to short corners, and do you think he will now get the better of Lando if he continues? Well, yeah, I made this point, and I do think that over the winter, not because Oscar thought I've got away from short corners and I need to get back to being how I was and how I drove and what made me as good as I was in Formula 3 and Formula 2 and early years in Formula 1. Not that at all. I think it was, well, Lando's won his world championship, you know, this is my year. I'm just going to go out there and give it everything I've got and not worry about Lando, not worry about his side of the garage, don't want to look at his telemetry or whatever. I'm sure he didn't say that, but something along those lines. And as a result of doing that, he is going back to being a much more natural driver who does get into corners a little bit earlier and who's beautiful to watch again. You know, he became very, very late braking, wide turnish, making mistakes-ish back end of last year. Well, halfway through last year. And that was, you know, the championship, can I win the championship? Oh, Lando's starting to go well again. Lots of things came into it. Now he's not thinking about Lando's side of the garage. And that's the difference. I've always said to Oscar, and I did say this about Lando when he's getting blown away by Oscar as well, stop thinking about the other side of the garage and do what you do well. And that's what's happening with Oscar right now. Can he continue to do that throughout the year? I suspect he can, because I think, you know, providing he doesn't get too psyched out on the odd race when Lando does have a really good run over the weekend for whatever reason, then that's fine. But my gut feeling, and I did express this before the season started, is that Lando, having now won a world championship, will be just out there taking advantage of the good days when things go well. But when they're not going well, he's just going to be enjoying himself and relaxed, a bit as he drove in Suzuka. You know, he wasn't in the same class as Oscar at Suzuka, and yet he didn't seem that worried about it, and he seemed quite relaxed, and he was waving to the crowd as the world champion after the race. You know, just driven a great race. P5, whatever it was, you know, and P4, and I can't remember. It's irrelevant anyway. And that's the guy that Oscar now has to beat, and I think he'll be able to do that, and I think he will continue to go even further. Only coffee saves Peter. Well, there you go. Yeah, still a bit cold now. Very cold actually, but nothing wrong there. Trump must ask Pam Bondi to sue F1 over super clipping. Seriously. Yeah, well, but there is a point there, though, isn't there? Which is that there was two things. One, I think that the Andretti's used Jim Jordan, did they not, quite a lot to get the entry sorted. So Jim Jordan, please advise on Cadillac's current performance. And secondly, did we not see Trump in the McLaren garage, arm in arm with Zach Brown and big mates with him at Miami a couple of years ago? So Zach, please advise on what's going on. Yep. Learn, teach, learn. Do you think Toto treats Russell badly compared to his teammates? No, not at all. No. And George is intelligent enough, clever enough, wise enough to know that if it wasn't for Toto, he wouldn't be where he is and winning Grand Prix pretty frequently. And he's just annoyed that he's getting beaten by Kimi. As I say, it's quite funny to see all the oh, so proud of Kimi, brilliant. I'd love to see him doing so well, isn't it wonderful? Where's all that gone, George? And George has now got to get his head around how to drive a dragster, and that's not easy. In a very short change of mind. Chillverse, hi Peter. What do you think about the recent podcast Martin Brundle did, in which he talked about Max leaving and that he won't be missed, and compared to it with Nico Rosberg? Well, I don't want to, I can't comment on something that obviously isn't verbatim of what Martin said. To say that Max will not be missed just like that is absurd, and I don't think that's probably what Martin said. He probably meant, like all racing drivers, he's replaceable, like Nico Rosberg was replaceable. But in my opinion, Nico Rosberg was nothing like as good a driver as Max Verstappen, and Max will be missed because he is a gold standard, and whereas Nico never was, in my opinion. And that's the problem. And it's the regulations that have driven Max out. It's not the relentless pursuit of Lewis Hamilton and having to beat Lewis Hamilton and the stress involved in doing that drove Nico out of it. So different things completely. And I think it's completely wrong to say that Max won't be missed, because there's a lot of Max fans around the world, a lot. And I put my hand up as one of them, and I'll miss him, that's for sure. So there you go. He will be missed by me. So yeah. Ripso says, I've been watching the 2004 season, and apart from Schumacher dominating, the racing was fantastic. Spa especially was really fun. There was no problems with overtaking, just people remember one guy. Yeah, it was good, and we took it for granted then. And it all went wrong, in my opinion. I blame Ross Brawn for all of this. It all went wrong when he okayed a survey to say to the fans of the world, do you want more overtaking? I mean, why ask that? Everybody knows the answer is going to be yes. And as a result of that, all these ridiculous changes were made. And a lot of it is just Band-Aid stuff now. And how many times have we seen Liberty stroke the FIA doing presentations of the new car for the new formula, which is all designed to make overtaking much better, and we're going to have this here and that there, and this barge board there, and this wheel cover there, and blah, blah, blah. And it never works. Of course, the purists will say, the engineering purists, well, it did work, it had a little bit more here and a little bit more, but it never really worked, because we know what the real problem is. The cars are too big, too heavy, and too much aero. Zavej Dougal, who's one of our regulars, thank you so much. What about V10s with 70-30 split and 100 kilo lighter cars? Sounds good to me. And sustainable fuel. Let's not forget about that. I'm totally into sustainable fuel. I mean, that's something that Formula One should be enhancing and bringing to the world stage. Come on, 440 watching, but just 104 likes. Come on, people. Thank you very much, Learn, Teach, Learn. That's very kind of you to say that. I always feel embarrassed saying those things, so I never do. Right, what else? Sashin Seshadari. Peter, how do you see wet races in these regs playing out? Lighter cars, torque spikes, low downforce. Sounds like aquaplaning territory. I see lots of delays, and I see lots of, the track's still a bit too wettish going on here. And I see Max storming down the pit lane saying, start the race, start the race. And assuming he's still in Formula One. And so, yeah, you're right. I think a lot of people, you only got to take one or two cars to lose it on the outlaps from the pits for the FIA to step in and say, we're not going to race until the track is dry. And that'll probably happen. If it can happen in a race at Suzuka on the straight and Ollie Behrman can have a big shunt, believe me, it's going to happen in the wet on the outlaps from the pits, let alone the formation lap. And what's the start going to be like? All those speed differentials in the wet. All I'm saying is when you can't see anything from the back of the grid. Anyway, back road bender. Sorry, I know I asked it before. Just I cannot find a great answer online. What is a competitor is 6 seconds within our pit window? Well, I think they're referring to the ability to come in and still retain your position. So that competitor, if you let him he's 6 seconds away now. But if he's only 1 second away, we need to be very, very conscious that we've got to cover him with the pit stop. I think that's what they're saying. It's all sort of, it's all this thing, the great thing, the undercut, which I've never been a fan of, because it, a bit like, the tire strategy people in the teams, the undercut people, which is the same team of people, it's the strategy lot, only think in two dimensions. Is it going to be an undercut or not? They never think in terms of ambient, what the driver's going to feel like with a new set of tires, what happens if he takes the strip off his visor and raises the visor a little bit in the pit stop, gets a bit of fresh air. They never bring all those other factors in, and indeed overtaking itself, or indeed defense in the old days. So yeah, but it is all tied up to the whole great glory of the undercut, the triple undercut, quadruple undercut. What the hell does it all mean? So anyway, there we go. Foamy Media, people who mention Ron, Lewis and Alonso need to look deeper. Alonso let McLaren down. He expected to be treated as world champion, and Lewis the rookie. Ron is a winner on both cars. Well, yeah, absolutely. And if you want to take it even deeper, did Fernando Alonso not walk away basically from a massive shunt in a Renault in Interlagos in the wet one year? Massive shunt. Do you not walk away? And I say that because you can ask yourself another question. Which individual is the most responsible for the presence of carbon chassis in Formula One? Oh, Ron Dennis. Oh, okay. He sort of indirectly saved Fernando's life that day. Interesting. See my point? If anybody is underrated in the annals of Formula One, it is Ron Dennis, in my opinion, because he did three things of total astonishment. One is he brought carbon chassis into Formula One by allowing John Barnard to have the vision brought to him by Steve Nichols to get the cars made by Hercules in the United States in 1980 and changed the face of Formula One safety forevermore. Two, he gave us Lewis Hamilton. Without Ron Dennis, there would have been no Lewis Hamilton. And whether you like Lewis or not, he's done a massive amount for Formula One, and he's an extremely fast, extremely good racing driver, even today. And three, he actually withstood Bernie Ecclestone throwing $100 million fine at him for nothing, basically for nothing, for doing nothing wrong. When the real problem was initiated by Ferrari and a disgruntled Ferrari employee stealing drawings from Ferrari. Yeah, McLaren shouldn't have taken them. They should have reported that straight away. But that's not $100 million fine. That's a rap on the knuckles compared with, say, Sebastian Vettel driving into the side of Lewis Hamilton behind the safety car at Baku, where he got a rap on the knuckles. So, but nonetheless, he got the $100 million fine and he took it, and they still almost won the world championship that year. Now, I think those three things are absolutely remarkable. And it's about time people gave Ron Dennis the respect he deserves, including Fernando for that matter, because, yeah, maybe there were moments when Fernando wanted to do this and Ron wanted to do that and Lewis got what Fernando wanted. I have no idea if that happened, whether it was a front wing or rear wing or test day or whatever it was. But in the overall picture, Ron Dennis has done a massive amount for the sport, a massive amount for safety. And Fernando Alonso is one of the guys who can put his hand up and say that Ron helped to save his life. Because if that accident happened in an aluminium honeycomb chassis, I hate to think what would have happened. Learn, teach, learn says, I think Oscar will beat Lando. Yeah, I think he will. Peter, do you think, this is Zishin Nasfar, do you think Colapinto is doing better this season so far? Or are you still of the opinion that he was similar to Enduran? Well, on the basis that I think the cars superficially are a bit easier to drive in the sense that they are dragsters. And if you get it half right, you're not going to be that much off the pace. I think it's, yeah, maybe, but he was still a long way from Gasly in qualifying, wasn't he? And a long way in the race for that matter. All you can relate Colapinto to is what Pierre Gasly's doing. That's how good the Alpine is. So in a car that good, Colapinto's massively off the pace still. And so do I think Jack Doohan would be doing a better job? Yes. Alonso hung McLaren out to dry. It was a bad time, foamy meter. Well, I think they did. Alonso and Pedro de la Rosa, got to say, you know, his mate, who was definitely a major part of that whole thing, which resulted in the $100 million fine. B4527. Hi, Peter. How different was Seb and Fernando in terms of driving style? I dreamed of a Fernando Seb team up at Aston Martin, but Lance is there. Yeah, well, Lance will always be at Aston Martin, so that's that. Seb and Fernando are pretty different. Seb, a much more supple initial turn-in, very, very good handwork. Very good, very fast handwork, very supple, very soft movements, elbows, everything very soft. Beautiful to watch in terms of correction and balance. Footwork, I'd say Fernando much better than Sebastian. Sebastian pretty locked into one way of being quick, which was sort of Jacques Lafitte, Jean Alesi style of extending the straight down to a V point, breaking down to that V point, slow rotation speed, minimum speed, and then Ving out of it, as distinct from turning in on the brakes like a Max, who's getting a much earlier turn in. But in the case of Seb, he's a later turn in, but he's braking to a later point because he's just doing this V in the middle of the corner. But he could only get away with that if he had a really good back end on the car, as he did at Red Bull for those 4 years. And then the downforce levels changed because of the regulations. And then he became, you know, not as good as a Daniel Ricciardo in the same car. So that was kind of the end of Seb. Whereas Fernando's got a much bigger vocabulary of talent over a wide variety of idiosyncrasies thrown at you by any given racing car. Can drive a bad car well, can put up with a downforce imbalance, can live with tire graining better than most. He's a very, very polished driver. His one flaw, if that's the right word, a bit like Ayrton Senna's throttle blipping was a flaw, is his initial steering input, which compared to Seb's is sort of 50 times more spiky. But that's just an idiosyncrasy that Fernando's always had in his driving. It's always just an initial that, just to get the car, so he can feel, that's how he feels the car. The minute he can feel the loaded left rear or left front, whichever it is, or if he's going into a right-hander, that's the moment that Fernando just feels the surface of the road and everything just happens naturally for him in keeping everything square. And that's a talent that I don't think Seb's ever had. So two different, very different drivers. And probably Fernando could drive any car that Seb could drive, but I doubt it's the other way around. That's the difference between those two. And when Seb was slower than Fernando, I'm not sure he'd understand why. And he'd probably want to change a few things. Whereas Fernando said, no, I don't need all that downforce at the rear. Give me a front. Yeah, I mean, it's that. Fernando can drive a lot more with the front end of the car than Seb could. Right. Learn, Teach, Learn says, Lewis Hamilton and McLaren did not follow agreed rules, taking turns to go out first in qualifying, etc. Yeah, I think there was a bit of that, but, you know, it wasn't a big deal, was it? Bit of that. But, you know, if that was the case, you make up for it the next race. Again, if you take the overall picture, I think Fernando mistakenly felt that McLaren were hurting him, and he mistakenly left the team. He could have won a world championship had he stayed at another world championship had he stayed at McLaren, in my opinion. Ripso says, I don't think they'll ever go back to V10. Sadly, it's a bygone era. However, I think the future will be in doing a rally Group B and just opening it up to allow them freedom for different technologies. Yeah, maybe. Maybe they'll think, oh, well, we made a massive mistake here by being too prescriptive in what everybody's got to do. We'll open it right up. And as you say, it could become a rally Group B then, which could become a disaster. So there we go. McLaren cheated anyway. I dispute that. I don't think McLaren cheated at all. As I've just explained, I mean, that was a very loaded fine. If anybody was cheating, it was probably Ferrari. Not cheating, but, you know, they allowed a guy to become so disgruntled that he stole drawings. That was what it all about. Learn, Teach, Learn says, I don't understand the hype around Colapinto. I've not been impressed. Well, the hype is that he brings quite a lot of money from Argentina. That's the money. That's the thing. And Argentina has a great motor racing heritage. And the hype there is enormous because here is a decent Argentine driver who's doing a demo in Argentina very soon, I think, in this period. Obviously not in a current car. But, you know, to compare him in any way with Carlos Reutemann is nonsense, because totally different style. I mean, Colapinto it breaks late, turns in wide. He's sort of Liam Lawson without Liam's polish at the moment. He may get better, but he can brake very late, and he can get on the power in a reasonable way, and he can hold a slide very well. But, you know, that's the counterpoint to Carlos Reutemann. So there we go. Right, let's move on to some final questions, because we've got to get down to Peter being taken by Dexter for a long walk, I think is the next thing, isn't it? Let's have a look. Steve still plays games at Ripso. He's talking to at Ripso now. Grosjean's halo parted the Armco barriers when the car went through. If not for the halo, he would have been decapitated like poor Helmut Koenig in 74 at Watkins Glen, and indeed Francois Sever in 73 at Watkins Glen. So yeah, very sad. Yeah, the halo did a very good job there. Saved so many lives. Emerald Isle says Martin Brundle has said Max is damaging Formula One. Quite sure what that's all about. I'm going to give Martin the benefit of the doubt here, because I know him quite well, and I can't imagine he would have said that. You're all going to say, well, he did. Well, I can't imagine. And end of story. I can't imagine he would, because it's a silly comment. All right. I think, okay. You're talking about the halo. I'm talking about the carbon chassis. The carbon chassis was a huge thing in terms of safety in Formula One. Massive. Hi, Peter. Do you think, this is from Maker, do you think Rovanperä would make it to Formula One? Well, I thought he might. I don't think he will now. And that's very sad, isn't it? Because he's got a lot of talent. But he was a little bit up and down in rallying even, wasn't he? Some days he'd be fabulous, and other days he would be sort of Elfyn Evans. No disrespect to Elfyn, because he's good. But there is another level above Elfyn, which is the Ogier, Rovanperä, Ollie Solberg area. And Callie was a little bit inconsistent in finding that, I think. Anyway, I love rallying still, and looking forward to the next one, which I think is in, what, Croatia? Gandalf the Fool. Hi, Peter. Hope you're doing great. I am indeed. Thank you very much. Richard Mitchum. Hi, Peter. Do we know if all Mercedes powertrain cars have the same battery? I think the general consensus between Gavin White and Scarbs, who know a lot more than I do about this sort of thing, is that they do. But I may be wrong there. Learn, Teach, Learn says, much prefer to listen to Peter than Martin. Oh, that's very kind, thank you. But no, Martin's a good bloke, and very good racing driver in his time as well. I'll never forget that battle he had with Nigel and Silverstone in the county saloon BMWs, which were probably 3 Series BMs, but yeah, it was just amazing racing. Okay, we should get Kimi Räikkönen on the show. There you go. Right, I'll do my best. I'm pretty sure he's going to say no. Why I need to do this show? I'm too busy. I'm too busy going to shops, going for jet ski. No, bye-bye. And so it ain't going to happen, I don't think. But anyway, I've got you guys on the show. I've got all you guys asking all these great questions and making me think of all these things. So thank you so much for your input. Brilliant. Loved it. And we'll do another one as soon as possible. I'm not sure when, but it'll be very soon. So don't worry. And yeah, big thanks to everybody, to REC Watches, to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and of course to TrackNinja. We need more proper data from companies like TrackNinja, I think, don't we? Because that would solve all the problem. We can't believe everything we're seeing on the screen, but if we had TrackNinja there, I think it would be somewhat different. That'd be good, wouldn't it? Anyway, big thanks to everybody, and see you soon. Stay safe and have a good rest of the day or evening, wherever you are in the world. Take care.